The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello and welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews. My name is Nick. I am the creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are here tonight for a live stream, live reading of a new book. This is the 12th book that we have read on the channel, and it is very wonderful indeed to have you here tonight. Hopefully you can hear me and see me, and the broadcast is coming. It looks good on my end. Please let me know in the chat if everything is coming through loud and clear for you. It's a very nice day in England. It's Friday, which makes people happy everywhere because they are free to enjoy their weekend, most of us. And I hope you have had a good week and you are looking forward to the weekend ahead. Hopefully you've got some wholesome activities planned and you're not just going to, poison yourself and then spend 2 days with a horrible hangover and do it all again next week. Plan something wholesome, rejuvenating, uplifting, healthy. Do something with people you love. Do something that's good for you that your elderly future self is going to thank you for, right? I think that's the best way to do it. Thank you for those of you tuning in. We've got Frank, Mindhack, Timmy, Doris K over on YouTube, and it sounds like the broadcast is loud and clear. We had a problem last Friday. My OBS studio had a problem. It hit its encoding limit, and I think I fixed it. I've lowered the resolution that we're broadcasting at, so we shouldn't have that problem again. But just in case we do, I've done what I can. So if it happens again, I'll have to do more to fix it. But it's great to be here. We're starting a new book tonight. This is going to be Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era by Zbigniew Brzezinski. I've been practicing how to pronounce it, and Wikipedia actually has a little button you can press, and it'll play an audio recording of the correct pronunciation. And Brzezinski doesn't sound anything like you might imagine it sounds seeing it written down. There's barely any consonant noises in it. It's more like like that. But I might play that for you in a little bit during the preamble ramble. I'm very excited today to be starting a new book. I enjoyed the last book very much, but it was quite a big departure from the kind of stuff we usually tackle. We've gone through some pretty dense sort of academic level books that deal with names, dates, places, pretty dry in a lot of instances. I'm thinking of the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, Fabian Freeway, Rockefeller Foundation. We dealt with a lot of books that are not the most entertaining to read. They're not the most gripping. It's not like a Dan Brown novel where you are turning the page just full of excitement about what's going to happen to the protagonist as he embarks on this adventure to save the world. It's not like that. That's really not what we're here for. We're not here for the thrills and spills and chills, although maybe we do get a few chills when we read some of the things that these people write down. But really what we're here for is to dig up those little nuggets that give us an insight into how the world really works by the powerful players, the people who tend not to get too much spotlight. Although, as we're going to see in the case of Zbigniew, he did get quite a bit of spotlight. In fact, he was a regular talking head on various news channels, mainly left-leaning, over in America, and going through his Wikipedia page and picking out things of interest, I actually came to view him as more nuanced than some of the kind of hate-filled demon in skin suit figures that we tend to think about and contemplate on the channel sometime. And I always have to give a shout out to Frank in the chat for providing us with that excellent phrase, demons in skin suits, because it just sums it up so perfectly that I don't think more needs to be said. But in the case of Zbigniew, I think he's a little more nuanced. He actually has, at least on paper, right? At least at first glance. Because, of course, as we're going to find out, he is connected in all the main ways that all the sort of evil people are. And I think his role, in the book, he's talking about America's role in the Technotronic Era. I think Zbigniew's role was to be a kind of devil's advocate, to have some points of view and opinions and arguments which would appeal to left-leaning people. Now, we know from our study of the Fabian Freeway that the left are often brought along for the ride because their desire to see justice, to see fairness, to see equality in the world gets the better of them and is exploited to draw them along on agendas which actually result in the consolidation and centralization of power. But you can get support for this by promising that you're standing up for the downtrodden, and you're trying to fix it for the little guy to make it better for him. And this gets people support. It gets them voting and campaigning and petitioning. And that's because a lot of people are inherently good. They want to see good results. They can look around and see, obviously, the systems that we are living in are causing a lot of pain and suffering, heartache, struggle, strife, stress. And it doesn't have to be this way, and they're right. And then they say, well, the system's broken and we need to reform it and fix it. And that's the bit where they're wrong. Because the truth is the system is working exactly as it's designed to work. And the future phases and iterations of the system have already been planned out. And in order to get us there, to push through those changes, support amongst the general population needs to be built up and established. And you do this by allowing a certain amount of pain and struggle and strife. You've got to allow a certain amount of stress and, death and sickness. And then when you come up with your proposed solutions, people say, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. I'll vote for you. I'll pay more taxes. I'll donate to your cause, etc., etc. People don't realize that this function is built into the system, and it's how we are pushed from one phase to the next phase. And we think it's evolving organically. And actually, all the people who are standing up and saying, we need change and we need fairness and we need justice, those people are also part of the system. And they're going to actually, as I said earlier, lead us down a path of more consolidation of control, more centralization of power, and more poverty, more equality, but only equal in the sense that everyone in the world, more people in the world are going to be poor, and fewer people in the world are going to be not poor, right? It's that squeezing of the middle class. It's that suction of wealth and assets upwards to the minority, and then everybody else just fighting and scrambling around at the bottom, crabs in a bucket, red ants and black ants in the jar that's being furiously shaken by the world controllers, as Aldous Huxley called them. So we're going to be diving into his book today and learning a little bit about Zbigniew, who was close to these circles of power, the world controllers, as you might call them, as Huxley called them. And we're going to see what his view is about America. And what's interesting about the subtitle is it's America's role. I always think of a role in terms of a play, or when I had good friends who all took drama when I was in secondary school. So between the ages of about 12 and 16, my form room was the drama room, in fact. So I was in there every day, in the morning and at the end of the day. And a bunch of my friends took drama class, and it was 95% girls and then 5% boys who realized that's where all the girls were. and they wanted to, they signed up for that class for that reason. And so I got pulled into their end of year performance, and we did a sort of a redo of the infamous Blackadder episode where they go over the top. And it's a hilarious episode, but it's tragic as well. And it's the end of the series because the soldiers throughout the series have been hanging around and having these sort of bizarre, hilarious conversations throughout the series. And then at the very end, they receive the order, and it's about them sort of drumming each other up and egging each other on, and then getting prepared to go out into no man's land to certain death, right? So it's a very sort of sad happy type of episode, and we recreated that, me and a bunch of friends. And my role was my good friend was Melchit. I think I was Darling, right? I had a very minor role, but I was Darling. But my point is that when you have a role, you are given a script and you are given a persona to embody, and you are told what to do. And here are the actions, and here are the words you're going to say, here are the feelings you're going to embody, and here is the message that you are to communicate to the audience. And if you do it well, and if you are effective, then the audience will be taken in. They will be brought along, and they will believe that you are that person that you're basically pretending to be. They will forget that you are Nick, and they will be like, "Oh, that's Darling." Although it's a bad example because the role of Darling wasn't a particularly profound or important one. But my point is that when you play a role, it presupposes an author of some description who has defined that role, who has written the words, who has made the screenplay, planned and plotted the scene and what's going to happen. And then you show up, and you have generally a bit of wiggle room when you're doing your role. You can ad-lib a little bit, you can improvise, but for the most part, the broad strokes of the plot have been decided, and you are there to just carry that out. And I think on the very front page of the book, that's quite a tell. What is America's role in the Technotronic era? What will the country of America be used for by the people who do that? The people at the very, very top of these systems, the ones who operate on the grand chessboard, as Zbigniew called it in his other book entitled The Grand Chessboard. Of course, black and white Masonic checkerboard being the surface on which the players maneuver and manipulate their units, which have various skills and abilities and strengths and weaknesses. But one of the key things to remember is that although the black team and the white team do battle and there can only be one winner, the people controlling those teams tend to be good friends and tend to relax and enjoy each other's company over a beer or a glass of whiskey or a cigar or something like that once the game is over. And this is how we've got to look at the world and how it works. There's games afoot. There are people with influence, power, control, vying for more of that power. Because as Alan Watts said on one of his talks, greed is one of those, greed is addictive. And your first hit of it is always the best. And then after that, you need more and more and more. And you can never be quite satisfied. You're chasing the dragon, as they say in the drug use world. And greed is like that. Once you have a taste of power, it gets you into it and you want more, right? And I think this provides us with a more accurate way of looking at the world, a way of looking at the world and its events that actually makes more sense. So it's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to diving into this book. And as I've been rambling, we had a few more people slide on in to the YouTube chat. We got Asmelia Dayful is here. We got Hasdak, Gary G, and Bitcoin mining. Fantastic. Hope you're all doing well. I am probably not going to be able to keep up with all your comments, although I will glance over and check them from time to time and see if I can pick some out. Suffice to say that I'm very grateful to have you here and commenting. It is lovely indeed. And apologies if I don't get to mention your comment on the stream, but I got to multitask, and everyone knows that men can't multitask. But I'm reading the book, I'm operating a laptop, I'm keeping a track on the little lights and dials and gadgets and widgets. And Tammy's here, which is also good as well. Hello, Tammy. So I've got a bit of a preamble ramble, and we're going to get right into it. It's nothing too unsurprising. I'm sure you'll kind of be underwhelmed when you see what I've got prepared, because these days I have even less time to prepare these preamble rambles now that I am a father and we have a wonderful, beautiful son to look after. I actually have to cobble these things together in between changing nappies and feeding and all the other good stuff. You know, I had a t-shirt on that I changed just before the live stream because I realized it had sort of puke stains. Not really puke, but he just regurgitates partially digested milk every now and again. And it kind of looks a bit cheesy, and that gets on the t-shirt. And then you remember that, oh yeah, I'm walking around with partially digested milk stains on the shirt. It's not a good look. You don't want to do that on a live stream, so I got to get changed. And yeah, but it's good. I'm happy. I am by no means complaining. I see we got UHF99 over on Rumble. How is it going? Good to have you here. Glad to have you here indeed. And Mindhack tells us that power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. And apparently Henry Kissinger said that. And that is a perfect segue into our preamble ramble, in which Henry Kissinger does feature. So I thought the best thing we should do really is to just quickly have a look at the man himself, the man who wrote the book. Because actually, I've heard the name, I've heard people talk about this book, Jay Dyer, Alan Watt, many others, but I haven't read any of his books, and I haven't looked into this guy at all. So this was new to me, all new information. It's all and it's all the learning journey, as I like to call it. I don't present myself as an expert. I don't know all this stuff inside out like the back of my hand. I'm like as flabbergasted when I come upon these characters and the things they say as anyone else. And so that's why I like to mention that up front. If you're coming here for like a sort of Asperger's autistic level rundown of all the key points that are relevant to this man and his work, that's not what you're going to get. You're going to mainly just get me fumbling my way through his book. I'm probably too dumb to even understand this book. There's a lot of footnotes in here. But, you know, we'll go on, we'll do our best, and we'll give it a go. So this is Zbigniew Brzezinski, and I'm going to mute myself and play these little audios here to you of how you pronounce this correctly.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Sorry if that was a bit loud.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
You see what I mean about that second one? That's worth repeating again, because this one actually, I don't know who they recorded for this one, but he sounds drunk to me. He sounds like he's been drinking a lot of vodka, but we'll go for that one again, just so you can practice.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
You see what I mean about his last name? Brzezinski. It's like, I don't know. But I think I've got Zbigniew, I've got that bit down, I think. So I'm happy with that. So, who is this fellow? Well, Zbigniew was a Polish-American diplomat and a political scientist. So right off the bat, I'm looking at this word scientist, and I'm thinking, okay, that's ringing alarm bells. We all know what scientism, what they tend to do. They position themselves as experts. They tell us that they've got a piece of software which dictates we have to cull the world's populations, and everyone goes, oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So, and this guy is, he's into the science of politics. And I'm reminded again of Alan Watt, who says that the people who are running this place, this planet, this holding pen for humans, they have access to ancient sciences of population management and control, of civilizational creation, of banking and mercantilism, and they know exactly what they're doing, and nothing is accidental. And they've been doing it since the time of the pharaohs and beyond that, even before records began. And that's this idea that these are sciences, right? The sciences of creating civilization, of managing populations, of going through the motions of keeping huge populations not like under control, basically, making sure that you are living off them while producing and contributing nothing yourself. That's the science here that we're all kind of struggling and suffering under, right? But he's a political scientist, and he served as counselor to Lyndon B. Johnson from 1966 to 1967, and he was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor from 1977 to 1981. Brzezinski belonged to the realist school of international relations. So that's something I might cover in a future Preamble Ramble, because it's international relations and there's a realist arm to that. Sounds interesting. But he was standing in the geopolitical tradition of Halford Mackinder and Nicholas J. Spikeman. Again, don't know either of these guys, but Halford Mackinder was British. And director of the London School of Economics, set up by the Fabian Socialists. Interesting. Okay. So another two characters worth looking into in future Preamble Rambles, no doubt. He says, it says the elements of liberal idealism have also been identified in his outlook. Brzezinski was the primary organizer of the Trilateral Commission. And we'll go into that as well on another intro. Major foreign policy events during his time in office included the normalization of relations with the People's Republic of China. That's really interesting, because Brzezinski had a close relationship with David Rockefeller, and the Rockefeller Foundation were involved in kind of opening up China, right, as a market, as a place to invest, as a place to test and try out a certain way of managing, a certain way of population control. Okay, quite a few talking heads out in our space say things like China is the model that they want to roll out everywhere else. And of course, we all hear the stories about surveillance in China and social credit scores being rolled out, this sort of stuff. So anywhere that we have somebody from the West building relationships and going out to China and opening that corridor of exchange is worth paying attention to. Another thing he was involved in was the overthrow of the US-friendly, not that he was involved in, but it was a major event, the US-friendly Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and the start of the Iranian Revolution. Relevant to what we are living through today, and shows you that these things go back, right? And it connects in a very interesting way. And Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, I know, has written a book, and it's bloody expensive. You can get it for £100 at the cheapest, and at the top end, it's going for £200, £300, £400. So there's got to be some juicy stuff in there. Brzezinski's personal views have been described as progressive, which always begs the question, what is being progressed? Whose plans are being progressed here? Or what are we progressing towards? What is the destination at the end of this progression? People don't ask those two questions often enough. They just say, oh, it's progress. But also people use that as a kind of cynical thing to say, where they're like, well, that's progress. You know, if you're complaining about the fact that you can't afford to put your heating on, or you can't afford clean organic meat because the price is just going parabolic, that's progress. It's the price of progress. And there's this sort of cynical sense that progress is a good thing, but then we also use it to blame bad things on it. It's weird. So the word progress, it's vague. What does it mean? People need to be a little more specific and ask this kind of question. He's also been described as international. Now, I actually posted something in my Telegram chat about this word earlier today, which I'm going to show you here, because I was thinking about the word internet, and I broke it down into its two parts. You've got the word inter and the word net, and then I did the same with the word international. If you break it down, you've got the word inter, which is a verb, which means to place a dead body in a grave or a tomb, right? To inter. And then you've got nation, which is a large body of people associated with a particular territory. So the word international, you are placing a dead body in this case, a nation, which is a large body of people, in a grave or tomb. And it reminded me of this quote from the Rockefeller Memoirs book, where he says, "We are part of a secret cabal, internationalists conspiring to build one world. I stand guilty and I am proud of it." And it just put a new spin on the word internationalism, internationalist, international. You know, you are interring the nation. So the body of people in that nation are getting buried. There's a lot of layers and meaning to these words that we take for granted. It's good to pay attention and break them down every once in a while. But Brzezinski has also been called a political liberal and strongly anti-communist, although he apparently denies that, as we find out later on. He's been praised for his ability to see the big picture. So he can see the big picture. What is the big picture? Maybe the big picture actually means the big plan, right? The big business plan that involves all nations, all peoples everywhere, and is under the control of that parasitical minority. But they say big picture because it doesn't betray the fact that things are controlled at a much higher level than Wikipedia wants to admit. Brzezinski served as the Robert E. Osgood Professor of American Foreign Policy at Johns Hopkins University. All right, so they pop up again and again and again. Particularly, they were running the Event 201 along with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation before the Big C event kicked off. They have a School of Advanced International Studies. So this is reminding me of Royal Institute for International Affairs. And again, it's that word international, isn't it? Inter the nation. And that by its very, by its literal meaning, it cannot be democratic, right? Because democracy is about the people in a nation voting to do what they want to do. And this is interring that nation. This is putting that nation, that democracy, into killing it, putting it in a tomb. So international studies. He was also a scholar at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a member of various boards and councils. He frequently appeared as an expert, so he's a scientist and an expert, on PBS and ABC News and MSNBC. And interestingly, on MSNBC, his daughter Mika Brzezinski is a co-anchor. And I was reminded of a very infamous clip of her, which we can play, actually. We could just do that now. I think it's here. Yeah, I got it here. It's 45 seconds, but it's very much worth getting on the record and repeating, especially if anyone out there has not heard it before. But a startling admission from Zbigniew's daughter in this clip.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I hear. What Yamiche just said is what I hear from all the Trump supporters that I talk to who were Trump voters and are still Trump supporters. They go, yeah, you guys are going crazy. He's doing, what are you so surprised about? He's doing exactly what he said he's going to do.
Well, and I think that the dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts. And it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think. And that is our job.
Yeah, if you look at the issues.
Yeah, that's what she said. She's worried about Trump controlling what people think, and that's our job, right? That's our job. Maybe, and who does she mean by our job? Does she mean the Brzezinskis? Does she mean the news anchors? That's the question, isn't it? Obviously, Donald is outstepping his role there. It's not his role to control what people think. That's our role. That's our job. That is what we are here to do. So that's a very interesting clip, worth getting on the record. I'll just say as well, good evening to Nicholas Jones and Mayday and Elizabeth Kendall, who I've just spotted over on YouTube. Lovely indeed to have you here. And UHF99 says progress equals regress. Yeah, that's it. So wherever you see progressive, what you actually want to read that as is regressive. Just like wherever you see sustainable development, you need to read it as sustainable austerity. So yeah, that's a good clarification there. Thank you for that. So that is Mika Brzezinski telling you that it is her job and some other group that she belongs to. It's their job to control what people think. But back to Zbigniew in his early years. He was born in Warsaw, Poland, into a Catholic family originally from this place that I'm not going to try and pronounce, but it looks beautiful. His parents were Leonia and Tadeusz. His dad was a Polish diplomat who was posted to Germany, and Zbigniew thus spent some of his earliest years witnessing the rise of the Nazis, and his dad was posted to the Soviet Union during Stalin's Great Purge, and was later praised by Israel for his work helping Jews escape from the Nazis. Very interesting, the mentions of Israel in this article. It pops up a few times, but it goes back to Zbigniew's father. In academia, Brzezinski went to Loyola College in Montreal. And I've got to mention here, Loyola College, something I got to look into again and read more about, but Loyola is often mentioned by Alan Watt in his talks as the place where it was admitted that research was being done or had been completed on some sort of brain chip or some sort of device that could go inside the human body, which would override the individual's sense of who they are and kind of assimilate them into the hive mind, the Borg, right? And Alan Watt often talks about Loyola, and he says in Loyola they said, and they talked about, and I don't know, I wonder where if he's talking about this college in Montreal. There's also one in Chicago. It could be that one. But when I saw this pop up, I thought, oh, that reminds me of Alan Watt. And then I hovered over it, and it says that Loyola High School was built by the Jesuits. It was actually a Jesuit training school originally, and then it kind of morphed and changed as time went by. But yeah, quite an interesting connection there. One that I think is probably worth more research. But we'll move on today. I just thought I'd highlight that and mention it. So Brzezinski went to McGill in 1945. He got his Bachelor and Masters of Arts in 1949 and 1950. And his master's thesis focused on the various nationalities within the Soviet Union. Got his PhD in 1953. And then he collaborated with Carl Friedrich to develop the concept of totalitarianism in order to criticize the Soviets. So over again and again, it says that he was criticizing the Soviets and he was anti-communist. But he was an expert in their systems, right? He was an expert in their methodology, their strategies, and I can't help but think that being an expert in those strategies and given what we know of the foundations, as recorded in Renee Worms's book Foundations, which we're reading next after this one, that the foundations had this stated goal of merging the Soviet system with the West and creating a third system that had aspects of the two. So if you think of the communist effort as an experiment, it was a test. It was a sort of, let's roll this out, see what happens. Let's collect the lessons learned. Let's study it, see what worked, see what went wrong, and then merge it into the West, the system of the West, and then have this as our end goal, right? As what this is the thing that we're progressing to. In other words, this is the outcome that America's role is fulfilling and working towards, unbeknownst to most of the average Joe and Jane on the street, right? So that's kind of how I view his deep study and expertise in communism and totalitarianism. It's like, okay, let's figure out what went wrong and how can we improve it and roll it out properly. And Mindhack says the third way. Yeah, that's right. So he was on the faculty of Harvard University and Columbia University, and he headed the Research Institute on Communist Affairs. After Harvard, so very soon after Harvard awarded an associate professorship to Henry Kissinger instead of to Brzezinski. He moved to New York in a strop to teach at Columbia, right? So he was hoping for this Harvard associate professorships, but Kissinger beat him. And this kind of rivalry, this kind of back and forth between Kissinger and Brzezinski is a theme throughout this whole article, but I think mainly performative. I think they both had roles to play, and there's a good reason to think that they were working on the same side, regardless of what the blue team, red team narrative might have you believe. He also, Brzezinski, this is, taught future Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and he also became a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he joined the Bilderberg Group. That's the only mention there. There's that one sentence. Council on Foreign Relations is mentioned further down, actually, when he gives a speech. Bilderberg Group is not mentioned again. But I had a quick look, and I found that Henry Kissinger is also closely associated with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group. So that is the link between the two. Even though Henry Kissinger was a Republican and Brzezinski was most of the time a Democrat, both of them were CFR and Bilderberg attendees. So where's their loyalty lie, really? Yeah, Mindhack says the dialectic, that's it. It's the red team, it's the blue team, and we argue this one point, and the red team argues the other point, and we pretend to have this disagreement, and then we have to compromise because this is a democracy, and that's the outcome that we had planned from the beginning, right? This is how you get nudged along the plan, but you have this illusion of there being a back and forth and there being a disagreement, but actually there isn't. It's all kayfabe. So, during the presidential elections, Brzezinski advised John F. Kennedy, and he urged a non-antagonistic policy towards Eastern European governments. Then during the 70s, he proposed that the Soviet system was incapable of evolving beyond the industrial phase into the Technotronic age. So again, kind of reminding me of this desire to merge the systems, take what worked well, improve upon it, iterate again, and bring it, as we rolled out this Technotronic age, or the technocratic age is another word, it could be used, taking those lessons of the Soviet system and rolling them out in the West, while at the same time pushing this illusion of there being a competition between, the Cold War. Actually, the people were analyzing the systems and going, right, how do we merge these? And again, just like you have the blue team, the red team, to get you moving down the path towards the third way, it's the same thing, just on a bigger scale. Zbigniew supported the Vietnam War, and then he went on to found the Trilateral Commission. So here, the book gets a mention. It says, in his 1970 piece, Between Two Ages, Brzezinski argues that a coordinated policy among developed nations, was necessary in order to counter global instability erupting from the increasing economic inequality. So it's centralization. That's what coordinated policy means. It's like, okay, let's all get together and let's work together and unify our interests, okay? Out of this thesis, Brzezinski co-founded the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller. There you are. We just saw him in on that little screen grab that I put up earlier. Proud internationalist, guilty as charged, in his own words. And David Rockefeller served as director from 73 to 76. The Trilateral Commission is a group of prominent political and business leaders and academics, primarily from the US, Western Europe, and Japan. Its purpose was to strengthen relations among the three most industrially advanced regions of the capitalist world. In 1974, Brzezinski selected Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter as a member. And I got to mention a book here. It's another one that I haven't read, but it's worth getting on the record. I'll flash it up because it's actually pretty affordable. It's not that hard to find. This is Trilateralism, edited by Holly Scalar. It's a massive book. It's an academic, but it's elite planning for world management, right? And on the back it says, what do Jimmy Carter, John Anderson, George Bush, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, Cyrus Vance, Walt Mondale, and Andrew Young have in common with David Rockefeller? The answer: Trilateral Commission. Members also include top execs of Exxon, General Motors, Ford, Coca-Cola, Bank of America, Cargill, Bechtel, General Electric, CBS, Time, Barclays Bank, Rio Tinto, Mitsubishi, etc., etc., etc. And of course, our fearless leader, Keir Stalin, is a member of the Trilateral Commission, right? Frank Lennon also mentions Patrick Wood's book, Trilaterals over Washington, co-authored with Anthony Sutton, and I do have that right here. Trilaterals over Washington, volumes 1 and 2. That is probably a little more accessible. It's a bit thinner than the Holly Sklar compendium. But yes, 2 books there worth grabbing if you want to know more about the Trilateral Commission in particular. What I'm thinking of is how these areas of the world are now in fairly dire straits in certain ways, particularly thinking birth rates, thinking immigration, demographic transformation. These areas are now being told they have to deindustrialize and go through a process of degrowth, because there's other areas in the world, the poorer areas, that have to be brought up and be helped, because we're facing this climate catastrophe that's going to kill everybody. And unless the developed, wealthy areas make a sacrifice, for the greater good, that kind of narrative. So it would be interesting to see the links between the Trilateral Commission, its efforts, its impact, and what has happened since it was founded. But that is a key thing to know about Zbigniew Brzezinski. So continuing, he was advisor to President Carter. Brzezinski became Carter's principal foreign policy advisor in 1975. He was an outspoken critic of the Nixon-Kissinger over-reliance on détente, and he favored the Helsinki process, which focused on human rights, international law, and peaceful engagement. So human rights and international law immediately makes me think of the UN, right? Their Declaration on Human Rights. Who authored that? Where did that come from? And I won't even get into the idea that human rights come from humans. Humans can't just make up human rights, right? Either all humans have them and they're objective and they're intrinsic to being a human, or they're arbitrary and relative, and we get to decide what rights we have and what rights other people have, which just doesn't make any sense. But this focus on human rights and international law makes me think of one world government, New World Order, these kinds of solutions to the problems. And it says Brzezinski was considered to be the Democrats' response to Republican Henry Kissinger. So there you are. After his victory in 1976, Carter made Brzezinski National Security Advisor, and then Brzezinski assisted with writing parts of Carter's inaugural address. So these kind of bits are the little admissions that you might vote for Carter, but you've got Brzezinski whispering in his ear, and you've got him writing his speeches for him. So it's little admissions such as this one which show you that the people you're voting for, the figureheads, the strong man, the person that's going to fix it all, the woman, the minority, the representative, whatever, they have a whole team of people around them whispering in their ear, doing their work for them, telling them what to say. In other words, writing their script. In other words, they're playing a role, and the plot is already mapped out. But moving on. Brzezinski advised Carter in 1978 to engage the People's Republic of China. So that's that normalization piece again between America and China. This also resulted in the severing of ties with the United States' longtime anti-communist ally, the Republic of China, Taiwan. 1979 saw 2 major strategically important events. So that was what we mentioned at the top, the overthrow of the US ally Shah of Iran and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This was also led to the Iran hostage crisis, and Brzezinski anticipated the Soviet invasion and with the support of Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and People's Republic of China, he created a strategy to undermine the Soviet presence. So when you think of people using the world as a chessboard, you think of maybe Miles Copeland's book, Game of Nations. You think of Brzezinski's other book, The Grand Chessboard. It's really this admission that it's not the puppeticians and the politricks where the power lies. It's in other places, right? It's these diplomats. It's these often they have multiple nationalities, and they have dual citizenships to different countries. So of course, like they're going to have unclear allegiances because they're going to be pulled in different directions, right? So it's hard to believe that they're going to care about the native people of a particular nation when they didn't come from that place. They weren't born there. They immigrated there. They came from somewhere else, different culture, different time, different place, different religion. But yet they often find themselves in these positions of power and influence and control and prestige. So it's quite an interesting pattern to observe, particularly the question of the dual nationalities and what countries people tend to come from and what passports people tend to hold, right? It's a very interesting study to look into that. Continuing with the Wikipedia page, on November the 9th, 1979, Brzezinski was awakened at 3 a.m. by a phone call with a startling message. The Soviets had just launched 250 nuclear weapons at the United States. Minutes later, Brzezinski received another phone call. The early warning system actually showed 2,000 missiles heading toward the United States. As Brzezinski prepared to phone Jimmy Carter to plan a full-scale response, he received a third call. It was a false alarm. I'd never heard this story before. I didn't know this had happened. But apparently an early warning training tape generating indications of a large-scale Soviet nuclear attack had somehow transferred to the actual early warning network, which triggered an all-too-real scramble. Hard to believe these kind of things happen by accident, but we're told these kind of stories, I think, quite often to make us feel insecure, make us feel scared, make us feel grateful that all our money is being taken off us and funding it into the military, into defense programs, and into these kinds of, for your safety. We're doing it for your own good because we care so much about you, right? So that's what I feel the origins of these kind of stories is to reinforce people a sense of insecurity. Brzezinski took a hardline stance against what seemed like an imminent Soviet invasion of Poland. He even made a midnight phone call to Pope John Paul II, who was also Polish, to warn him. So this guy had the Pope on the phone. He had a direct phone call. He didn't mind ringing the Pope up in the middle of the night. So that tells you also quite a bit about his level of influence. And then it says in 1981, President Carter presented Brzezinski with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I would like to see who else received that particular award, but I haven't looked at it yet. So, National Security Advisor, NSA. That's not the only NSA that we should be paying attention to, but of course, because there's the organization which hoovers up all of our internet communications, from which Edward Snowden became a whistleblower, right? But the NSA, it can also mean National Security Advisor. So once he got this position, Carter did a bit of reshuffling, and he decreased the NSC committees from 8 to 2. So that's National Security Council. And all that remained was the Policy Review Committee and the Special Coordinating Committee. And Brzezinski always chaired the Special Coordinating Committee. Carter believed that by making the NSA chairman of only one of the two committees, he would prevent the NSC from being the overwhelming influence on foreign policy decisions it had been under Kissinger's chairmanship during the Nixon administration. So what this bit shows us is that when Nixon was in, Kissinger was running this NSC, and Kissinger was a Bilderberger, Council on Foreign Relations guy. And then we have a change in administration. The blue team are elected. Brzezinski comes along. He gets given the NSA role, the National Security Advisor role. He becomes the chair of the PRC, but he's also a Council of Foreign Relations guy and a Bilderberg guy. So even though the team has changed from red to blue, it's still the same Council on Foreign Relations and Bilderberg running the show and sitting on these committees and making the decisions. So, you got to read these long, boring articles on Wikipedia, but they do actually reveal a lot about how things actually work. But continuing, it says, this council held a few formal meetings, only 10 times, and instead, Carter used frequent informal meetings as a decision-making device, typically his Friday breakfasts, usually attended by the Vice President, the Secretaries of State and Defense, Brzezinski, and the Chief Domestic Advisor. No agendas were prepared and no formal records were kept of these meetings. Again, telling you how it really works. They meet up, they get some waffles and a cup of coffee, and decisions are made, plans are hatched out, and it's not written down, and it is not visible to you and me and the people who supposedly elect these people. They just they hatch their schemes and their plans, and then they doctor the documentation after the fact and get it to say what they want it to say and leave out the bits that they don't want people to read. But continuing, from the beginning, Brzezinski made sure that the new NSC institutional relationships would assure him a major voice in the shaping of foreign policy. His power gradually expanded, and he increasingly assumed the role of a presidential emissary. So this is reminding me a little bit of Colonel House and his relationship with FDR, right? This kind of presidential emissary role where you might be seen as more of a handler, right? You're the real brains, the real strategist, the real power, and you just kind of stand off stage to the side of the puppet in the chair with the cameras, who people like to throw tomatoes at, as Alan Watts said. It says, like Kissinger before him, Brzezinski maintained his own personal relationship with Soviet ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Dobrynyin. Yeah. So it's hard to believe that Brzezinski had the interests of the American people at heart, right? He was born in Poland. He was obsessively studying the Soviet systems. He was hobnobbing over in China. I mean, I'd like to know what it is that he did that benefited the American people. So let's have a look at his major policies. Well, during the 1960s, he articulated the strategy of peaceful engagement for undermining the Soviet bloc. So again, not a head-to-head fight with them, but instead it's like we'll undermine them and fold them into our system and move closer to that coveted one world system. During the 70s and 80s, Brzezinski participated in the formation of the Trilateral Commission in order to more closely cement U.S., Japanese, and European relations. So that just means standardize these places, right? Because when you cement relations, you, like anything, if you start to become close to people, maybe you get a new friend, maybe you get a new romantic interest. The more time you spend together, the more time you are around each other, the more like each other you become, right? People often say that you are the amalgamation of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I have observed, even since I can think back to when I was very young, and I would emulate and copy and ape the things that my friends did and said. I would kind of take things that I thought that I liked, that they did or said, and I would try it on, and I would try it out myself, and I would kind of construct my identity from all these little things that I'd borrowed and observed and taken from other people. And so this is a process. It's a monkey see, monkey do process. And it's why television programming is so powerful, because all the stuff we see the characters doing on the screen, we then are more likely to act that out in our lives at home. So if we're watching a lot of shitty behavior, immoral behavior, a lot of drama, and a lot of I'm thinking of just immoral. I'll just leave it immoral behavior, right? If you're watching a lot of TV programs in which people are being immoral, then you're more likely to enact that and be immoral in your life. And this is just well known that this is a function of being human. And I'm observing it now, even like with my son, who's not even 2 months old, but he watches and he observes and he takes in and he copies facial expressions and sounds, and that's what we do. We program each other, right? But the television screen and the information planned and put on that screen for our consumption is largely for the purpose of influencing our behavior and making us ape and copy what we see on that screen. That's largely its function and role, right? We got Just Say Smith and Jones over on Rumble. How are you? Welcome. Looks like you got some good chats. I mean, some good things to add in there. And just on the topic of Micah Brzezinski, Just Say Smith and Jones is saying that she's been doing morning propaganda in America for years. I did mention it already, and we did play the famous clip of her saying it's her job to influence what people think. So, continuing on. The Afghan trap theory. I hadn't heard of this before. Quite interesting. Following the September 11th attacks, a theory that Brzezinski intentionally provoked the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was widely repeated. A 2020 review of declassified U.S. documents by Connor Tobin contends that this theory is a misrepresentation of the historical record, based almost entirely on a caricature of Brzezinski as an anti-communist fanatic. A disputed statement attributed to Brzezinski by a Le Nouveau Observateur journalist, which was repeatedly denied by Brzezinski himself. So that sounds to me like Brzezinski repeatedly denied being called an anti-communist fanatic. That's how I read it. It's kind of confusing, but I don't know why he would deny that. Right? But maybe that's a little tell about what his true intentions were. We got this section here on Iran, telling us about the revolutionary students that took American diplomats hostage. The Iran hostage crisis was debated and discussed, with Brzezinski arguing against Cyrus Vance's proposed diplomatic solutions. And then Vance had gout, and so he went to Florida for a long weekend. That little detail did give me a chuckle. And so while Vance was off enjoying his gout in Florida, Brzezinski held a meeting of the NSC, and he authorized Operation Eagle Claw. Deputy Secretary Warren Christopher, who attended the meeting in Vance's place, did not tell Vance. And furious, Vance handed in his resignation on principle, calling Brzezinski evil. Presumably for ruining his little gout weekend in Florida. President Carter aborted the operation after 3 of the 8 helicopters crashed. But the hostages were eventually released, but only after 444 days in captivity. And that was on the first inauguration of Ronald Reagan when they were released. So quite an amazing series of events. I would love to know more about this. Fortunately, this is really the first I've ever read about it. It says down here, along with Kissinger and David Rockefeller, Brzezinski played a role in convincing Carter to admit the exiled Shah into the U.S. And yeah, speaking of this exiled Shah, I'll show you his book, which is here. It's called The Answer to History. There he is. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. And if you want to get that from Amazon, you got a £291.98 fee to pay. Nearly £300. But you can go to bookfinder.com and you'll find a £100 copy, which is available on thrift books in the United States. And if you want to pay crazy money, you could also order a £1,000 copy. But there's not that many copies of this book out there, and they are pricey, which tells me there's got to be something in there worth reading. Brzezinski has compared complaints by U.S. officials about Iran's nuclear ambitions to similar statements made before the Iraq war began. He says, I think the administration, the president, and the vice president are trying to hype the atmosphere, and that is reminiscent of what preceded the war in Iraq. That's quite an interesting comment he's made there. I think this man is an absolute master of words, never saying too much or too little, and leaving things open to interpretation. The few quotes that I've read of him so far suggest this. We got Lil Ronnie Cooper as well. How's it going, sir? Good to see you. Or good to see your screen name, I should say. Okay. Picture here of Israel Prime Minister Menachem Begin playing Brzezinski in a game of chess. Camp David. And then we've got a bit here again about Brzezinski talking about human rights and how they could be used to put the Soviet Union ideologically on the defensive. And again, a lot of people who argue and push human rights are really pushing not God-given human rights, not endowed it into us by the Creator, but the UN derived and described Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, just the arbitrary list that the UN, the one, came up with and published and put out there, right? Arms control. On April the 5th, Brzezinski made a speech at the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, where he stated that competition between the two powers in the nuclear arms race would not simply end because of the accord, because of the agreement. Just highlighting that to show that he's speaking at the Council on Foreign Relations. And then this section is after power. So he leaves office and he becomes co-chairman of the Bush National Security Advisory Task Force. And he endorses Bush for president. That's Bush Sr., which signaled his break with the Democratic Party. So that shows you all you need to know, really. These parties really mean nothing. It's the same people inhabiting both sides of the aisle. And then Brzezinski published The Grand Failure in 1988, predicting the failure of the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms. And of course, that did happen only a few years later. He publicly opposed the Gulf War, and he argued that the United States would squander the international goodwill it had accumulated, and it could trigger wide resentment through the Arab world. Now, of course, that's something that we are seeing now with the whole Israel-Palestine situation. The Arab world is starting to pay a lot of attention to the United States, to also here in England, the same thing is happening. We've got these large Muslim populations, and they are gaining more influence and clout, because we just saw Keir Starmer saying that, threatening to recognize Palestine if Israel didn't stop indiscriminately murdering people there. Messy, ridiculous stuff. But it's been going on quite a long time. Brzezinski negatively viewed the succession of Vladimir Putin and became one of the foremost advocates of NATO expansion, right? So there again is your push, your advocacy for the one world system. He wrote in 1998 that without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. So that's 1998, right? Way before the Ukraine-Russian conflict erupted. So you can see he's involved in things that are playing out in the present day, 2025. And he was involved in them back then. He was commenting on them, observing them, and writing about them. So this guy was really in the know. He later came out in support of the 1999 NATO bombing of Serbia. I just can't wrap my head around people who support bombing. It's just, that's the only reason I highlighted that. I don't know anything about the Kosovo war or this situation, but just the fact that he came out in support of bombing, tells you a lot about him. Brzezinski argued against the 2003 invasion of Iraq. So this is where it turned for me a little bit, because I started to read things that I agreed with. But he argued against the invasion of Iraq and said it would be a mistake. He also called President George W. Bush, he called President George W. Bush's foreign policy catastrophic, which of course it proved to be so. He was a leading critic of George Bush's conduct of the War of Terror. In the Washington Post in 2007, he excoriated the Bush administration, arguing that their post-9/11 actions had damaged the reputation of the United States infinitely greater than any wild dreams entertained by the fanatical perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks. So actually, you know, he's just playing devil's advocate here, isn't he? He's just sort of not pandering, but he's embodying the Democrat, the blue team's position. But he's keeping them in the box of the mainstream narrative and explanation of, you know, the 11th of September event. He later stated that he had visceral contempt for British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who supported Bush's actions in Iraq. So, again, this is another point where I'm like, okay, that's something I actually agree with. I have visceral contempt for Tony B. Blair as well. And then in September 2007, he defended the book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by John Mearsheimer. And that's another thing he said that I thought, yeah, good on him. I actually think he's probably, I would probably agree with him on that as well. So The Israel Lobby is a book about, the Israel Lobby and U.S. foreign policy. I mean, that's what it's about. Of course, it's an anti-Semitic book. He endorsed Barack Obama, and then Obama in kind introduced Brzezinski as one of our most outstanding thinkers. That was a terrible Obama accent. I gave it a go. But some pro-Israel commentators questioned his criticism of the Israel lobby. How dare you criticize? It's anti-Semitic to criticize the Israel lobby. In September 2009 interview, The Daily Beast, Brzezinski again got the Israel lobby's backup because he said that they asked if Obama should be insisting Israel not conduct an airstrike on Iran. So remember, this is 2009. Brzezinski said, "We are not exactly impotent little babies. They have to fly over our airspace in Iraq. Are we just going to sit there and watch?" This is what I mean about him being a real master of words, right? And then this was interpreted by Israel supporters as supporting the downing of Israeli jets to prevent an attack on Iran. So anti-Semite as well, on top of it all. Even though his dad helped Jews escape the Nazis. In 2011, Brzezinski supported the NATO intervention against Gaddafi, okay? And he called non-intervention morally dubious and politically questionable. So throwing his weight around there for the expansion of the Rothschilds banking dynasty. On March 3rd, 2014, he authored an op-ed piece for the Washington Post called "What is to be Done? Putin's aggression in Ukraine needs a response." So again, 2014. So this guy's really part of the machinery that whips people up into supporting war, into supporting intervention and bombing and foreign tampering with other countries by the American military, which is rich, isn't it, for a guy from Poland, really. He compared Russian President Vladimir to Adolf Hitler. Of course he did. I'm sure he was like, this guy is literally Hitler. And then he suggested that NATO should be put on high alert. So again, encouraging that people subsume their national sovereignty and identity to this greater international, where we inter the nation, this force where the nation is interred, right? NATO, the international force. And then he was deeply troubled by the election of Donald Trump. 2 days after Trump's election in 2016, Brzezinski warned of the coming turmoil in the nation and the world. So again, this is the kind of warning that comes from somebody who knows what the plan is, in my opinion. On 2017, May the 4th be with you, he sent out his final tweet. He said, quote, "Sophisticated U.S. leadership is the sine qua non of a stable world order. However, we lack the former, while the latter is getting worse." Mic drop. a little bit about his personal life. His eldest son, Ian, served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO, and was also a principal at Booz Allen Hamilton, which I think is... I was going to say banking, but it's not. It says it's an American company specializing in digital transformation and artificial intelligence. So there you go. Brzezinski's eldest son has his fingers in the AI pie. Whereas his younger son, Mark, served on President Clinton's National Security Council as an expert on Russia and has served as U.S. ambassador to Sweden and Poland. And of course, his daughter, Micah, I don't know how you pronounce it, is a television news presenter and co-host of MSNBC's weekday morning program, Morning Joe, where she tells the American population what to think. And it says that he was deeply Catholic. And that's why he supported the bombing of human beings, presumably. Public life. At the time of his death, he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So, vote Team Red, vote Team Blue. Doesn't matter because you're going to get the Royal Institute for International Affairs, aka CFR. He did make a number of film appearances, and he does have an IMDb page. When he died, it was the age of 89. So they didn't let him live quite as long as Henry Kissinger. He obviously didn't eat as many children, and he didn't cause the murder of as many innocents as Kissinger did. So he didn't get the secret magical elixir that let you get to 100 years old. But 89 is still pretty good. Yeah, and then it says it talks about his funeral and the people who showed up, and nobody that significant apart from Madeleine Albright. It says here though that there's a quote from Carter. It says, "If I could choose my seatmate, it would be Dr. Brzezinski." Talking about flying on Air Force One. And then it says here that former National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, who was 94, did not attend Brzezinski's funeral, but he sent a note. And the note said, "The world is an emptier place without Zbig pushing the limits of his insights." So that it just kind of reads as a backhanded compliment to me. But it's just funny. Little tidbit there. Kissinger didn't bother to arrive at the funeral. He just sent a note. If you want to go down to the bottom of this Wikipedia page, you can click this link here and it will give you a PDF of the book that we are about to read tonight. And I have opened that up here in this tab. What is really interesting is this is a PDF of the book, but it's not a scan of the book. It is the text of the book, allegedly, but the text has just been put into a Word document. So the page numbers do not at all match the page numbers in this copy that I have here. The layout is totally different. This version of it has 130 pages, whereas my copy has 334 pages. Just curious that they've uploaded this Word document instead of a facsimile reproduction of the book itself. So you can grab this and read it, but I would be cautious. I'm wondering if they've uploaded it in this format because things have been removed or changed or altered. I don't know. I could be paranoid for no reason when I say that, but strange. In this day and age where you can get facsimile reproductions of most books on archive, I don't know why they didn't just put the book up, right? A scan of the book. So there you go. That's on the Wikipedia page. And there's quite a few links at the bottom of the Wikipedia. That's the only PDF of his work. But it does mention all these other books. And he was publishing right up till 2012. And he's done monographs and other books. Essays, articles. Oh, he worked with Samuel P. Huntington here, who did the book... I have up there, it's The Clash of Civilizations and World Order. He's written for Foreign Affairs, New York Times, and he's done some reports for the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations here as well. So there you are. That is Zbigniew Brzezinski, according to Wikipedia. And that's the end of my preamble ramble tonight. So this is the part where I tell you that if you want to support the show at any time, I would be most grateful. You can go to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews, where you can find everything, such as places to subscribe, a little guitar music bundle download down there if you like the sound of my acoustic guitar meanderings on the intros and the outros. You can send me an email, listen to my album on SoundCloud, and donate by buying me a coffee, sending me something through PayPal. And you can join the book club, which I am in the process of revamping, updating, and rebooting and relaunching. I'm aiming for September for the relaunch, and it depends how much time I can get away from my son to work on that. But I'm aiming for having something to launch in September. It's going to be very interesting. I'm really excited about it. It's going to be fun, interactive, beneficial, useful, educational, profitable, and hopefully life-changing for those who participate. So keep an eye out for that. But until then, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. That is where you can get involved with Hayes Reviews and do all the good stuff that you good people who appreciate this kind of content do, such as I already said, commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing. That's the main stuff, really. You got to do what I've written down on this card here. You got to make number go up. That's what it's all about, right? Make number go up. That is the game that most people on this planet are actually playing. We got Melvin P, who says, "I wish there were more people like you, mate." Oh, thank you. That's so kind, Melvin. Oh, and you deleted the comment immediately. Well, I read it out on stream before you got a chance to delete it. So, oh, you put it back. Thanks. Melvin, I feel the same about you. I wish there were more people like you. I appreciate that. UHF99 is saying, "It's interesting that all these folks are puppets doing the show for their masters. So what's this rubbish about support and open statements but to become dialectics? Am I right? Or, yeah, it's all just proper no in it." I don't even know how to begin breaking down that comment, my friend, but I appreciate you leaving it for me. Apparently, there's 33 top messages. Oh, I shouldn't. It always does this. It always puts it onto top chat instead of live chat, which means I miss stuff. Apologies, everybody. I didn't even know that you could switch between top chat and live chat until somebody told me in the chat. And so I've been missing comments this whole time. Asmelia Dayful says, "Have a drink. You've been talking for an hour and a half. Don't pass out." All right, I'll take that advice. Lovely. I'm glad somebody out there cares about my health and well-being. No, I do like talking. Although if you met me in real life, you might be shocked that I'm actually not that talkative. I'm quite introvert. It's just, as I've said before, when I'm sitting here and I can't see, people's expressions, I can just talk and ramble and just get it all out and just have a stream of consciousness kind of experience. I can talk a lot more and at ease than when I have that face-to-face instant feedback of somebody rolling their eyes or looking bored or tuning out or interrupting or whatever it might be. But yeah, in real life, I'm actually quite quiet and don't have much to say. But there you are. So let's do it. Let's get into the book. Very excited for this. It took me a while to grab a copy. I haven't had this copy for very long. Even though I've known about it for quite a while, it's pretty expensive. And I wanted to get an early edition to minimize the chance that there'd been any alterations or changes between publications. And I thought this was a first edition, but unfortunately it's not. It's actually a second printing. So I don't know if there's been any slight changes or alterations, but you can see here that back when this is a 1970 publication. Originally, this edition was 1971, I think. $2.45. This was how much it was worth back then, $2.45. I paid like £40 or something for this. Between £40 and £50, I think, if memory serves. So just again to remind people that I think the price of books are going to go up. They're artifacts. They're valuable. I think they're going to increase in value as well as we head into the AI-mediated digital gulag of the future. Actual physical copies of things they're just going to be more valuable in my estimation. And but be careful who you sell them to, because there's probably MI6 operatives out there and CIA operatives who buy these and just chuck them in the bin. Can't have too many copies of that circulating, can we? But this is Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And there's a handy dandy little diagram there which looks to be like some sort of electrical circuit of some description. It's a Viking compass book. Let's get into it. So there's a bunch of books he's done a lot of books. He's done The Permanent Purge, Totalitarian Dictatorship and Autocracy. And these were all obviously before he wrote this one. And he did a lot since as well. It's a 1970 book, as you can see. And it says somewhere down here that, this is the 1971 issue. It's a second printing, September 1971. But it says as well that portions of this book appeared in Encounter in different forms. So I'm guessing Encounter is some kind of journal or magazine or something, because they quite often publish portions of their books in installments prior to actually just bringing the book out in its entirety. So you might be able to hunt down copies of Encounter as well to find extracts. All right, so let's start with the acknowledgements. Though I got the first word wrong. Got tonight's reading off to a good start. Though this book deals with communism only in part, and then primarily in relation to the broader issues with which I am concerned, the Research Institute on Communist Affairs of Columbia University provided me with invaluable research assistance and with a congenial and stimulating setting. So again, why is there a Research Institute on Communist Affairs? Why does that exist? They would argue, I suppose, it's the Cold War, so we need to study communism and communist affairs and that sort of thing. But is it to defeat them? Or is it to learn from and amalgamate their system into the West's system? My colleagues at the Institute little realize how very helpful they have been in the gradual process of shaping my ideas, testing my views, and enlarging my perspectives. That is, I don't know. I thought my mind is obviously filthy. I thought he was going to go for something else with that. Enlarging my perspectives. He's obviously hot for communist research. The manuscript was read and criticized by a number of friends and colleagues. I'm especially grateful to Professor Samuel P. Huntington for his trenchant criticisms and very helpful recommendations, to Professor Albert A. Mavrinac, who maintained our friendly tradition of his questioning my arguments and of forcing me to rethink some of my propositions, to Mrs. Christine Dodson, the former administrative assistant of the Research Institute, who prepared a very constructive and highly perceptive chapter-length critique of the entire draft, and to Professor Alexander Ehrlich for steering me away from some economic pitfalls. I wonder if this Alexander Ehrlich is related to Paul Ehrlich of... did Paul Ehrlich do... wasn't Limits to Growth, was it? But it was it the Population Explosion, something like that, I think. I'm also most obliged and grateful to Miss Sophia Sluzar, currently the admin assistant, who very ably supervised the overall preparation of the manuscript and who earlier was instrumental in preparing the tables and assembling the needed data. Miss Toby Trister, my research assistant. I did not know Toby could be a first name of a miss. That is interesting. Unless Miss Toby was just way ahead of his or her time and doing the whole gender blurring thing back in the 70s. Miss Toby Trister was indefatigable in exposing my inaccuracies, in filling bibliographic gaps, and in completing the research. Miss Dorothy Rodnight, Miss Michelle Elwin, and Mr. Myron Gutman amiably and efficiently, even when under great pressure of time, devoted their energies to the completion of the manuscript. To all of them I owe a debt which I am pleased to acknowledge. So I'm just going to put a little line here under Professor Samuel P. Huntington, because I'm pretty sure it's his book I've got. Let's have a look. This one. The Clash of Civilizations, Samuel P. Huntington, and the Remaking of World Order. Kissinger says it's one of the most important books to have emerged since the end of the Cold War. So there you are. Samuel P. Huntington. It's quite cheap, that one, actually, on Amazon. I got it for like £2 or something. I also wish to note my obligation to Mr. Marshall Best of the Viking Press, on whose experience and wise counsel I often relied, and to Mr. Stanley Hockman for his sensitive editorial assistance. A special mention is due to my wife. In all my writing, I've never come across a more conscientious reader, a more ferocious critic, and a more determined, dare I say, obstinate perfectionist. I have no hesitation in saying, though only now I say it with relief, that any merit this essay may have is in large measure due to her efforts. Oh, that's nice. He also dedicates it to his children here, Ian, Mark, and Mika. All right, contents. We got 2 parts. No, we haven't, sorry. We got 5 parts to the book. We got Global Impact of the Technotronic Revolution. We have got The Age of Volatile Belief. We have Communism, the Problem of Relevance. We have The American Transition. And America and the World is part 5. So some pretty interesting headings. I've heard that this book is quite ahead of its time. So we've got to bear in mind and keep reminding ourselves that it was written in the 70s, right? So, introduction. Let's go. Perhaps the time is past for the comprehensive grand vision. In some ways, it was a necessary substitute for ignorance, a compensation in breadth for the lack of depth in man's understanding of his world. But even if this is so, the result of more knowledge may be greater ignorance, or at least the feeling of ignorance, about where we are and where we are heading, and particularly where we should head, than was true when in fact we knew less but thought we knew more. I am not sure that this need be so. In any case, I am not satisfied with the fragmented, microscopic understanding of the parts, and I feel the need for some, even if crude, approximation of a larger perspective. This book is an effort to provide such a perspective. It is an attempt to define the meaning within a dynamic framework of a major aspect of our contemporary reality. The emerging global political process which increasingly blurs the traditional distinctions between domestic and international politics. In working toward that definition, I shall focus particularly on the meaning for the United States of the emergence of this process, seeking to draw implications from an examination of the forces that are molding it. Okay. The emerging global political process. I like how, like a lot of writers, he talks about forces and in an emerging process, okay? Not a plan, not an agenda, not the diligent work of the Fabians, socialists, in their tortoise-like manner, or the proud internationalists such as David Rockefeller. No, it's just it's emerging, it's evolving, it's a natural thing, and these are just forces that are at work. So he's kind of attributing what would the word be? Fatalistic, impersonal quality to these events that are unfolding and occurring, right? Time and space shape our perception of reality. The specific moment and the particular setting dictate the way international estimates and priorities are defined. Sometimes, when the moment is historically ripe, the setting and the time may coalesce to provide a special insight. A perceptive formula is easier to articulate in a moment of special stress. Conditions of war, crisis, tension are in that sense particularly fertile. The situation of crisis permits sharper value judgments in keeping with man's ancient proclivity for dividing his reality into good and evil. Marxist dialectic is clearly in this tradition, and it infuses moral dichotomy into every assessment. But short of that critical condition, which in its most extreme form involves the alternatives of war or peace, global politics do not lend themselves to pat formulations and clear-cut predictions, even in a setting of extensive change. As a result, in most times, it's extraordinarily difficult to liberate oneself from the confining influence of the immediate and to perceive from a detached perspective the broader sweep of events. After having read Vernon Coleman for the last 11 live streams, this is a step change. I have to tell you. Like, just for example, that on this page, right? That sentence started there and ended there at the end of the paragraph. So this is a real shift in gears. Any abstract attempt to arrive at a capsule formula is bound to contain a measure of distortion. The influences that condition relations among states and the broad evolution of international affairs are too various. Yeah, the evolution of international affairs, not the planning, not the execution, not the diligent mapping out and wargaming of each and every outcome. No. It's just an evolving situation. Nonetheless, as long as we are aware that any such formulation inescapably contains a germ of falsehood, and hence must be tentative, the attempt represents an advance toward at least a partial understanding. The alternative is capitulation to complexity, the admission that no sense can be extracted from what is happening. The consequent triumph of ignorance exacts its own tribute in the form of unstable and reactive policies, the substitution of slogans for thought, the rigid adherence to generalized formulas made in another age, and in response to circumstances that are different in essence from our own, even if superficially similar. Today, the most industrially advanced countries, in the first instance the United States, are beginning to emerge from the industrial stage of their development. They are entering an age in which technology, and especially electronics, hence my neologism, technotronic, are increasingly becoming the principal determinants of social change, altering the mores, the social structure, the values, and the global outlook of society. So that kind of suggests that this sort of electronic revolution was always planned to be global from the start, right? And precisely because today change is so rapid and so complex, it is perhaps more important than ever before that our conduct of foreign affairs be guided by a sense of history. And to speak of history in this context is to speak simultaneously of the past and of the future. Since it focuses on international affairs, this book is at most only a very partial response to the need for a more comprehensive assessment. It is not an attempt to sum up the human condition, to combine philosophy and science, to provide answers to more perplexing questions concerning our reality. It is much more modest than that, and yet I am uneasily aware that it is already much too ambitious because it unavoidably touches on all these issues. The book is divided into 5 major parts. The first deals with the impact of the scientific technological revolution on world affairs in general, discussing more specifically the ambiguous position of the principal disseminator of that revolution, the United States. Yeah, so he's kind of saying that it's due to, Silicon Valley and these kind of corporations, companies, Microsoft, Apple. The United States is the main disseminator of all these gadgets and gizmos, these programs, the social media. I mean, he obviously wasn't thinking about social media and iPhones back in the 70s, but it's amazing how it applies and it still stands true in the modern day, even though he wrote it 60 years ago. This book's 60 years old. Dang. and analyzing the effects of the digital revolution. Oh, sorry, he doesn't call it that. He calls it the technological, electronic revolution on the so-called third world. The second part examines how the foregoing considerations have affected the content, style, and format of man's political outlook on his global reality, with particular reference to the changing role of ideology. The third part assesses the contemporary relevance of communism to problems of modernity, looking first at the experience of the Soviet Union and then examining the overall condition of international communism as a movement that once sought to combine internationalism and humanism. The fourth part focuses on the United States, a society that is both a social pioneer and a guinea pig for mankind. A guinea pig, that's a very interesting term. See, I've said before on these live streams that I feel like the various systems and nations that we live in, and they're all experiments, and they're all they're testing out and running these different forms of control, be it religious, political, financial, cultural, economic, and all these things are experiments, and they're testing different systems in different places on different groups of people to finesse and improve their science of civilizational control and government, right? Governance of masses of people. Now, I don't know if those sciences are already perfected and they know exactly what they're doing in every place and where it's all leading, or they're running different iterations in order to find out which works, which doesn't, and improve it and bring it all into this one world system of standardization that we're seeing emerging, right? I'm not sure which of those two is more accurate, but guinea pig for mankind indeed. It seeks to define and actually, sorry, that reminds me of something that didn't Keir Starlin come out a while ago? Back when I was reading, or we were reading, the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, I'm sure Keir Starlin, I had a clip of him saying that the immigration into the UK is a long experiment. I'm sure he used that word experiment or something, or words to that effect. He admitted it in that clip. It seeks to define the thrust of change and the historical meaning of the current American transition. The fifth part outlines in very broad terms the general directions that America might take in order to make an effective response to the previously discussed foreign and domestic dilemmas. Having said what the book does attempt, it might be helpful for the reader to indicate what it does not attempt. First of all, it is not an exercise in futurology. It is an effort to make sense of present trends, to develop a dynamic perspective on what is happening. Secondly, it's not a policy book, in the sense that its object is not to develop systematically a coherent series of prescriptions and programs. In Part 5, however, it does try to indicate the general directions toward which America should, and in some respects may, head. In the course of developing these theses, I have expanded on some of the ideas initially advanced in my article, America in the Technotronic Age, published in Encounter January 1968, which gave rise to considerable controversy. That'd be a magazine worth getting hold of, actually. Encounter January 1968. Type that into eBay so you can grab a copy. I should add that not only have I tried to amplify and clarify some of the rather condensed points made in that article, but I have significantly revised some of my views in the light of constructive criticisms made by my colleagues. So basically, he got told, you can't say that bit, retract that, change it, leave that out of the book form. So it might actually be very good to get a hold of that Encounter edition, see what he originally wrote in that article that was so controversial. It sounded like it led to him getting a slap on the wrist anyway. Don't tell them that bit. Moreover, that article addressed itself to only one aspect, discussed primarily in Part 1, of the much larger canvas that I have tried to paint in this volume. It is my hope that this essay will help to provide the reader with a better grasp of the nature of the political world we live in, of the forces shaping it, of the directions it is pursuing. In that sense, it might perhaps contribute to a sharper perception of the new political processes enveloping our world and move beyond the more traditional forms of examining international politics. I hope these advances here, though necessarily speculative, arbitrary, and in very many respects inescapably inadequate, may contribute to the increasing discussion of America's role in the world. In the course of the work, I have expressed my own opinions and exposed my prejudices. This effort is therefore more in the nature of a think piece backed by evidence than of a systematic exercise in social science methodology. He's got a footnote here saying, in this respect, I share the view of Barrington Moore Jr., that when we set the dominant body of current thinking against important figures in the 19th century, the following differences emerge. First of all, the critical spirit has all but disappeared. Second, modern sociology, and perhaps to a lesser extent also modern political science, economics, and psychology, are ahistorical. Third, modern social science tends to be abstract and formal. In research, social science today displays considerable technical virtuosity, but this virtuosity has been gained at the expense of content. Modern sociology has less to say about society than it did 50 years ago. That's from a 1958 book, Political Power and Social Theory. Finally, let me end this introduction with a confession that somewhat anticipates my argument. An apocalyptic-minded reader may find my thesis uncongenial because my view of America's role in the world is still an optimistic one. I say still because I am greatly troubled by the dilemmas we face at home and abroad, and even more so by the social and philosophical implications of the direction of change in our time. Nonetheless, my optimism is real. Although I do not mean to minimize the gravity of America's problems, their catalogue is long, the dilemmas are acute, and the signs of a meaningful response are at most ambivalent. I truly believe that this society has the capacity, the talent, the wealth, and increasingly the will to surmount the difficulties inherent in this current historic transition. Okay. Between Two Ages, and a quote by Hermann Hesse from Steppenwolf. Human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, only when two ages, two cultures, and religions overlap. There are times when a whole generation is caught in this way between two ages, two modes of life, with the consequence that it loses all power to understand itself and has no standard, no security, no simple acquiescence. So that helps us understand a little bit about the title of the book, Between Two Ages. The overlap between two cultures, two religions and ages, leading to real suffering, leading to hell. So, part one. The global impact of the Technotronic Revolution. The paradox of our time is that humanity is becoming simultaneously more unified and more fragmented. Yeah, that is a paradox, right? That is the principal thrust of contemporary change. Time and space have become so compressed that global politics manifest a tendency toward larger, more interwoven forms of cooperation, as well as toward the dissolution of established institutional and ideological loyalties. Humanity is becoming more integral and intimate, even as the differences in the condition of the separate societies are widening. Under these circumstances, proximity, instead of promoting unity, gives rise to tensions prompted by a new sense of global congestion. A new pattern of international politics is emerging. The world is ceasing to be an arena in which relatively self-contained, sovereign, and homogeneous nations interact, collaborate, clash, or make war. International politics, in the original sense of the term, were born when groups of people began to identify themselves and others in mutually exclusive terms: territory, language, symbols, beliefs. And when that identification became, in turn, the dominant factor in relations between these groups, the concept of national interest, based on geographical factors, traditional animosities or friendships, economics, and security considerations, implied a degree of autonomy and specificity that was possible only so long as nations were sufficiently separated in time and space to have both the room to maneuver and the distance needed to maintain separate identity. During the classical era of international politics, weapons, communications, economics, and ideology were all essentially national in scope. With the invention of modern artillery, weaponry required national arsenals and standing armies. In more recent times, it could be effectively and rapidly deployed by one nation against the frontiers of another. Communications, especially since the invention of the steam engine and the resulting age of railroads, reinforced national integration by making it possible to move people and goods across most nations in a period of time rarely exceeding 2 days. National economies, frequently resting on autarkic principles, stimulated both the awareness and the development of collective vested interest, protected by tariff walls. Nationalism so personalized community feelings that the nation became an extension of the ego. There's a footnote. This was a major change from the earlier feudal age. At that time, weapons were largely personal, communications were very limited and primarily oral, the economy was primitive and rural, the ideology stressed direct religion-based obeisance to a personally known chief. These conditions thus reinforced and reflected a more fragmented intranational political process. So he's kind of, it sounds like he's making up the case that, nationalism is bad. We've got to get rid of nationalism because it leads to wars, which we've heard many times in a lot of the other books that we've looked at. But I've never heard that nationalism became an extension of the nation as an extension of the ego. That's an interesting way to put it. You can hear my hungry son in the background there. All four factors mentioned above are now becoming global. Weapons of total destructive power can be applied at any point on the globe in a matter of minutes, in less time, in fact, than it takes for the police in a major city to respond to an emergency call. The entire globe is in closer reach and touch than a middle-sized European power was to its own capital 50 years ago. Transnational ties are gaining in importance, while the claims of nationalism, though still intense, are nonetheless becoming diluted. This change, naturally, has gone furthest in the most advanced countries. But no country is now immune to it. The consequence is a new era, an era of the global political process. Yet, though the process is global, real unity of mankind remains remote. The contemporary world is undergoing a change in many respects similar to that prompted by the earlier appearance of large population centers. The growth of such centers weakened intimate and direct lines of authority and contributed to the appearance of many conflicting and cross-cutting allegiances. A typical city dweller identifies himself simultaneously with a variety of groups: occupational, religious, leisure, political, and only rarely operates in an environment that is exclusively dominated by a single system of values and a unilinear personal commitment. American metropolitan politics are typically messy. Special interest and pressure groups, ethnic communities, political organizations, religious institutions, major industrial or financial forces, and even the criminal underworld interact in a pattern that simultaneously includes continuous limited warfare and accommodation. Global polities are acquiring some analogous characteristics. Nations of different sizes and developmentally in different historical epochs interact, creating friction, variable patterns of accommodation, and changing alignments. While the formal rules of the game maintain the illusion that it is played only by those players called states, and when war breaks out, the states become the only significant players. Short of war, the game is truly played on a much more informal basis, with much more mixed participation. Some states possess overwhelming power, others, the mini-states, are overshadowed by multi-million-dollar international corporations, major banks and financial interests, transnational organizations of religious or ideological character, and the emerging international institutions that in some cases, quote, represent the interests of the minor players, for example, the UN, or in other cases, mask the power of the major ones, for example, the Warsaw Pact or CETO. That whole paragraph there is very interesting. I'm very careful when I'm marking up these kind of books that are older than me and more valuable. But that paragraph, I think, is quite important. Just the admission and the acknowledgement that the level of the state is really not where it's at in a lot of cases. It's not where the game's played. That's what he said. The methods for coping with international conflicts are hence becoming similar to those for dealing with urban discord. A characteristic feature of concentrated humanity is the routinization of conflict. Direct violence becomes increasingly regulated and restricted and ultimately comes to be considered as a deviation from the norm. Organized mechanisms in the form of uniformed, salaried personnel are established to confine violence to socially tolerable limits. So he's talking about the monopoly on violence, which is held by the state, and the dishing out of uniforms to bullies and thugs who think they have the right to go around kidnapping people and putting them in cages, aka policy enforcers, policy officers, wearing the black and white Masonic checkerboard on their heads. I got lost. Oh yeah, the socially tolerable amounts of violence. Yeah, a certain measure of crime is accepted as unavoidable for the sake of order. Therefore, organized crime is generally preferred to anarchic violence, thus indirectly and informally becoming an extension of order. Right? Okay. Again, that is another quite an astonishing admission there. He's saying that rather than having all the violence and, turf wars and stabbings and gunfights on the street, people prefer the organized crime, right? The white-collar criminals. And because of this, because that's preferred to anarchic violence, it becomes an extension of order. So if you're going to have a new world order, then you're going to have organized crime on a global level as an extension of that new world order, according to Zbigniew's logic there. The routinization of conflict on a global scale has been the goal of statesmen for many decades. Agreements, conventions, and pacts have sought to govern it. None of these could prove effective in a system of relatively distinctive and sovereign units. But the appearance of rapid communications, which created not only physical proximity but also instant awareness of distant events, and the onset of the nuclear age, which for the first time made truly destructive global power available to at least two states, fundamentally altered the pattern of international conflict. On the one hand, these factors depressed its level, and on the other, they heightened its potential and increased its scope. Urban underworld wars do not give rise to much moral revulsion, nor are they seen as major threats to social peace. Only outbreaks of violence directed at that peace, as represented by human life and major vested interest, banks, shops, or private property, for example, are resolutely combated. Similarly, in the more advanced portions of the world, there is a tendency among the establishment and the middle class of the global city to be indifferent to third world conflicts and to view them as necessary attributes of a low level of development, provided, of course, that such conflicts do not feed back into the relations among the more powerful states. Wars in the third world thus seem tolerable as long as their international scale is contained at a level that does not seem to threaten major interests. footnote is telling us that. It's a quote. During the post-1945 years, the development of nuclear weapons, the formation of power blocks and multilateral alliance systems, and the increasing financial cost of modern warfare have all been factors inhibiting the outbreak of formal warfare between the advanced industrial nations. The majority of conflicts during these years have taken place in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, the so-called Third World, and a large number of them have followed on or been associated with the breakup of colonial empires, whether Ottoman, British, French, or Japanese, and the subsequent emergence of new states which are often small, poor, and insecure. That's from David Wood, Conflict in the 20th Century, Adelphi Papers. The above study contains a list of 80 conflicts that have occurred in the years 1945 to 1967. All but 8 of these conflicts involved Third World participants on both sides. The analogy with metropolitan politics is also made by Theodore H. von Lau in his thoughtful book, The Global City. Von Lau is particularly stimulating in his analysis of the impact of the Western, quote, metropolitan system on world politics during the last century. In our time, the routinization of conflict has also meant a shift from sustained warfare to sporadic outbreaks of violence. Sustained, prolonged warfare was made possible by the industrial age. In earlier times, armies confronted each other, fought pitched head-on battles, and like the gladiators of old, scored decisive victories or went down in defeat. The industrial age permitted societies to mobilize their manpower and resources for prolonged but indecisive struggles, resembling classical wrestling and requiring both skill and endurance. Nuclear weapons, never used in conflict between nuclear powers, pose the possibility of such mutual annihilation that they tend to freeze their possessors into passive restraint, with sporadic outbreaks of violence occurring on the peripheries of the confrontation. Though in the past violence tended to result in the use of maximum available power, today those states possessing maximum power strive to employ a minimum in the assertion of their interests. Right, so this is like why we've got here in the UK, we've got CASD, which is the continuous at-sea deterrent, which means that for the last 50 years the UK has had a nuclear submarine patrolling on patrol, which is capable of launching a nuclear weapon. I don't know how long it would take, but that's the at-sea deterrent. So nobody better bomb us, because if they do, we got our little sub ready to go to send a bomb right back. Since the appearance of nuclear weapons, relations between the superpowers have been governed by a rudimentary code of restraint forged by trial and error in the course of confrontations raging from Korea through Berlin to Cuba. It is likely that in the absence of these weapons, war would long since have broken out between the United States and the Soviet Union. Their destructive power has thus had a basic effect on the degree to which force is applied in the relations among states, compelling an unprecedented degree of prudence in the behavior of the most powerful states. Yeah, so it's just it's stopped the most powerful states going at each other, and instead the powerful states have instead just gone for the weaker ones and kind of plundered and pillaged them and waged skirmishes and wars there instead. Within the fragile framework in which the contemporary transformation of our reality occurs, nuclear weapons have thus created an entirely novel system of deterrence from the reliance on overwhelming power. In the case of urban politics, the weakness of accepted and respected immediate authority is compensated for by the sense of higher allegiance to the nation, as represented by the institutional expression of state power. The global city lacks that higher dimension, and much of the contemporary search for order is an attempt to create it or to find some equilibrium short of it. Otherwise, however, global politics are similarly characterized by the confusing pattern of involvement, congestion, and interaction, which cumulatively, though gradually, undermines the exclusiveness and the primacy of those hitherto relatively watertight compartments, the nation-states. In the process, international politics gradually become a much more intimate and overlapping process. Eras are historical abstractions. They are also an intellectual convenience. They are meant to be milestones on a road that over a period of time changes imperceptibly and yet quite profoundly. It's a matter of arbitrary judgment when one era ends and a new one begins. Neither the end nor the beginning can be clearly and sharply defined. On the formal plane, politics as a global process operate much as they did in the past, but the inner reality of that process is increasingly shaped by forces whose influence or scope transcend national lines. So there you are. Definitely going to get, that's another quotable part as well, because what he's saying is that on the face of it, you still do, you go through your elections and you still watch your PMQs on the TV, Prime Minister's questions, and you still watch the live feed from the House of Commons where they stand up and sit down and go through all that formality. But the forces at work, at least from this point and up to the present day, are international forces now. There's a wider, bigger game afoot, and really, as citizens, I don't know exactly what that word means, and I don't like to use it, but as participants in a nation and its political systems and machinery, what real influence, control, insight, awareness do we have, apart from what we're told through the mainstream media, which, as we know, is propaganda arm of the ruling class? So it's just it's an admission that the politics is still operating the way it has, but there's a inner reality to it, as he says here, that is international in nature. And this is why you've now got the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who's being a member of the Trilateral Commission, which was set up by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And it says that on the Wikipedia page. It's not conspiracy theory. Yeah, it's amazing this was written in the 70s. It really is, because it's so applicable and true and descriptive of 2025. So, continuing with Chapter 1, the onset of the Technotronic Age. I'm just going to adjust my angle here. The impact of science and technology on man and his society, especially in the more advanced countries of the world, is becoming the major source of contemporary change. Recent years have seen a proliferation of exciting and challenging literature on the future. In the United States, in Western Europe, and to a lesser degree in Japan and in the Soviet Union, a number of systematic, scholarly efforts have been made to project, predict, and grasp what the future holds for us. The transformation, it's interesting that he just says project, predict, and grasp. Again, like the thing that he's omitting, the thing that I think he's hiding, he's running cover for the fact that it's planned. There are goals, there are long-term agendas, 10, 50, 100 years out. And that's the thing that he has to never admit and never acknowledge. There's other little things he can acknowledge and admit, but he still has to push this narrative of it's evolving and it's just these impersonal forces that are at work and that are shaping things, right? The transformation that is now taking place, like, for example, he won't tell you about what we learned in Surveillance Valley, the history of these technologies. And most technology, much technology, is military in origin. And it is developed and tested and created by money that is taken from people who pay taxes. And that money is poured into technological development, and then it's rolled out with full awareness of its effects and its likely and its likely influence upon the individual and society as a whole, right? Surveillance Valley tells that story in a way that's irrefutable as far as I'm concerned. So I wonder if he'll give a nod to the true nature of technology and where it comes from and how it's created and how its purpose is usually militaristic. The transformation that is now taking place, especially in America, is already creating a society increasingly unlike its industrial predecessor. There's a footnote here with a number 1. I think that goes to the back of the book, or maybe the end of the chapter. I should have checked before where the footnotes are. Not the end of the chapter. So there's going to be footnotes at the back of the book, because the ones at the bottom of the page have this little sort of circular donut symbol. So I'm not going to go to the back for those footnotes. We can have a look at those later. The post-industrial society is becoming a technotronic society. Footnote: the term post-industrial is used by Daniel Bell, who has done much of the pioneering thinking on the subject. However, I prefer to use the neologism technotronic because it conveys more directly the character of the principal impulses for change in our time. Similarly, the term industrial described what otherwise could have been called the post-agricultural age. Okay, so he's saying post-industrial and technotronic, they mean the same thing. He's just using the word technotronic in place of the word post-industrial. So the industry is gone, right? If you're living in America, the industry's gone. If you're living in the United Kingdom, the industry's gone. Where's it gone? It's gone to China. It's gone to India. It's gone to Vietnam. It's gone to these kind of places. They've got the industry now. They're going through their industrial phase, and we're going through the post-industrial phase, i.e. the technotronic phase, i.e. the degrowth phase, the sustainable austerity phase. Many words for the same thing. The technotronic society, a society that is shaped culturally, psychologically, socially, and economically by the impact of technology and electronics, particularly in the area of computers and communications. The industrial process is no longer the principal determinant of social change, altering the mores, the social structure, and the values of society. In the industrial society, technical knowledge was applied primarily to one specific end, the acceleration and improvement of production techniques. Social consequences were a later byproduct of this paramount concern. In the technotronic society, scientific and technical knowledge, in addition to enhancing production capabilities, quickly spills over to affect almost all aspects of life directly. Accordingly, both the growing capacity for the instant calculation of the most complex interactions and the increasing availability of biochemical means of human control augment the potential scope of consciously chosen direction, and thereby also the pressures to direct, to choose, and to change. The increasing availability of biochemical means of human control. So he's comparing and contrasting the technotronic, i.e. post-industrial age, to the industrial age, right? In the industrial age, people were productive. They made things. They had craft. And of course, they were exploited, and they were pushed into cities, and they were made to work in despicable conditions in factories. But there was an output. There was a certain level of knowledge of producing that you would gain, right? You would know how a car is put together, and therefore how it works. You would know how to make furniture. You would know how to create some product or other. Now we're past that. Now we're not producing. We're not making things. We're not creating. We're in the Technotronic era, and we are increasingly coming under the influence of biochemical means of human control. It's funny how casually he just slipped that in there. Quite shocking, really. But anyway, continuing. Reliance on these new techniques of calculation and communication enhances the social importance of human intelligence and the immediate relevance of learning. The need to integrate social change is heightened by the increased ability to decipher the patterns of change. This, in turn, increases the significance of basic assumptions concerning the nature of man and the desirability of one or another form of social organization. Science thereby intensifies rather than diminishes the relevance of values, but it demands that they be cast in terms that go beyond the more crude ideologies of the industrial age. And this theme is developed further in part 2. So the old ways of thinking are crude. Science is propelling us forward, and we are having to rethink these basic assumptions that we used to make about man, about the human organism. So, new social patterns. For Norbert Wiener, quote, "The locus of an earlier industrial revolution before the main industrial revolution is to be found in the 15th century research pertaining to navigation, the nautical compass, as well as in the development of gunpowder and printing. Today, the functional equivalent of navigation is the thrust into space, which requires a rapid computing capacity beyond the means of the human brain." Yeah, they got to the moon with technology that was worse than most calculators have in it today. And they're unable to repeat that feat, apparently, because they lost it all, says the NASA scientist. The equivalent of gunpowder is modern nuclear physics, and that of printing is television and long-range instant communications. The consequence of this new technotronic revolution is the progressive emergence of a society that increasingly differs from the industrial one in a variety of economic, political, and social aspects. The following examples may be briefly cited to summarize some of the contrasts. Number 1. In an industrial society, the mode of production shifts from agriculture to industry, with the use of human and animal muscle supplanted by machine operation. In the technotronic society, industrial employment yields to services, with automation and cybernetics replacing the operation of machines by individuals. And what are we seeing today? The rollout of quote-unquote AI, artificial information, large language models, chatbots. They're coming thick and fast. They're just embedding it into every update of every software, of every system that they can, right? They're just making it so ubiquitous and commonplace, and they're forcibly automating many jobs and roles and processes that the human mind would do. So, yeah, ahead of the curve is putting it lightly. I don't know if there's a stronger way to phrase ahead of the curve, but he's so far ahead of the curve that he's kind of back on the curve, you know. Number 2, problems of employment and unemployment, to say nothing of the prior urbanization of the post-rural labor force, dominate the relationship between employers, labor, and the market in the industrial society, and the assurance of minimum welfare to the new industrial masses is a source of major concern. In the emerging new society, questions relating to the obsolescence of skills, security, vacations, leisure, and profit sharing dominate the relationship, and the psychic well-being of millions of relatively secure but potentially aimless lower middle class blue collar workers becomes a growing problem. So this is Yuval Noah Harari's infamous spiel about the useless class. What do we do for them? Drugs and computer games. Brzezinski was telling us about it back in the 70s. Number 3. Breaking down traditional barriers to education and thus creating the basic point of departure for social advancement is a major goal of social reformers in the industrial society. Education available for limited and specific periods of time is initially concerned with overcoming illiteracy and subsequently with technical training based largely on written sequential reasoning. In the Technotronic society, not only is education universal, but advanced training is available to almost all who have the basic talents, and there is far greater emphasis on quality selection. The essential problem is to discover the most effective techniques for the rational exploitation of social talent. The latest communication and calculating techniques are employed in this task. The educational process becomes a lengthier one and is increasingly reliant on audio-visual aids In addition, the flow of new knowledge necessitates more and more frequent refresher studies. This one's it's not hitting as hard for me, isn't this one, apart from the bit about, like, I'd say information is massively available and universal, but a lot of it's crap. A lot of it is propaganda, lies, deceit, and so I wouldn't call it education that's available. I think what we have instead is just we're drowning in information, but we're not given the skills to, we're not given the trivium method to parse it out into non-contradictory terms and items so that we can get a coherent, cohesive, and consistent understanding of reality, right? We're not given those skills, and that would be the important thing to give to people. Number 4. In the industrial society, social leadership shifts from the traditional rural aristocratic to an urban plutocratic elite. Newly acquired wealth is its foundation, and intense competition the outlet as well as the stimulus for its energy. In the Technotronic society, plutocratic preeminence is challenged by the political leadership, which is itself increasingly permeated. Interesting choice of words there. We know who likes to permeate and penetrate, don't we? Permeated by individuals possessing special skills, like the guy in Taken, and intellectual talents. Knowledge becomes a tool of power, and the effective mobilization of talent an important way to acquire power. So this bit is reminiscent of Klaus Schwab's Young Global Leaders and Penetrating the Cabinets of the world's governments, right? That's the acquisition of power by the effective mobilization of knowledge, right? Thinking Rhodes Scholars as well. Taking people out, buttering them up, training them, and then sending them back to their home country. This is what the Rockefellers did with to get allopathic medicine into China. So that's quite an important technique that he's outlining and describing there. Number 5, the university is an industrial society. In contrast to the situation in medieval times, is an The university in an industrial society is an aloof ivory tower, the repository of irrelevant, even if respected wisdom, and for a brief time, the fountainhead for budding members of the established social elite. In the Technotronic society, the university becomes an intensely involved think tank, the source of much sustained political planning and social innovation. Well, he's not wrong that the universities become politicized, but overwhelmingly politicized towards the extreme left, right? That's not even too controversial. Jonathan Haidt and others done plenty of work on that. But I don't think the social innovation is really there, unless you're talking about like clownfish and rainbow people. And it's not the kind of innovation that I think is really needed nor helpful. Just say Smith & Jones is asking, have I read Future Shock yet? I have not. Not yet. That's on my list, as with about 500 other books. Okay. Number 6. The turmoil inherent in the shift from a rigidly traditional rural society to an urban one engenders an inclination to seek total answers to social dilemmas, thus causing ideologies to thrive in the industrializing society. The American exception to this rule was due to the absence of a feudal tradition, a point well developed by Louis Hartz. In the industrial age, literacy makes for static, interrelated conceptual thinking congenial to ideological systems. In the Technotronic society, audio-visual communications prompt more changeable, disparate views of reality, not compressible into formal systems, even as the requirements of science and the new computative techniques place a premium on mathematical logic and systematic reasoning. The resulting tension is felt most acutely by scientists, with the consequence that some seek to confine reason to science while expressing their emotions through politics. Moreover, the increasing ability to reduce social conflicts to quantifiable and measurable dimensions reinforces the trend toward a more pragmatic approach to social problems, while it simultaneously stimulates new concerns with preserving humane values. So I think this point he's making about audio-visual communications prompt changeable, disparate views of reality. Yeah, that's the screen, right? That is the screen, and it's as a delivery mechanism of information. The sheer volume of channels and talking heads and information that is out there now. He's kind of describing the phenomena of echo chambers and how we all tend to have our cherry-picked sources and construct our worldview accordingly to the people we like to listen to and the people we gain benefit from. And it does also lead to what he's describing, this disparate view of reality. We're all in our little echo chambers, our little bubbles, and it's very hard to reach other people who don't share our worldview, right? I think those of us on this call and who are familiar with, for example, the work of Alan Watt, I just saw you got a mention there, we probably can sit and communicate and have conversations and find connection because we have a similar worldview. But that has been there are so many worldviews out there now due to the preponderance of information and talking heads on the internet and our ability to just mainline it straight into our brains by way of our glowing rectangles, that a lot of disparate views are out there, and it means a disintegration of social cohesion. And it's hard to find the people who see things the way you see them, because there are now so many different ways to see things based on your particular data set that you've taken in through your slave device, right? Number 7. In the industrial society, as hitherto passive masses become active, there are intense political conflicts over such matters as disenfranchisement and the right to vote. The issue of political participation is a crucial one. In the and I like how he says passive masses, right? It's not like they weren't locked out of that process by the elite, by that parasitic minority, right? The way when you call them passive massives, it's like, well, they could have been involved. You know, we would have listened to them if they wanted to get involved. They just didn't want to. They were just too busy tilling the soil, and working the earth and trying to grow enough potatoes to pay the local feudal lord who demanded his cut of their labor. Passive masses. No, it's that they've been historically locked out of that process because they're slaves. But he's not going to say that, is he? That's another part of the reality that he's not going to admit that he's running cover for. No, they were just passive. Anyway, they're getting active. They're getting motivated and whipped up and drummed up by the Fabian socialists. They're caring about enfranchisement and the right to vote. And they care about political participation. Whereas in the Technotronic age, the question is increasingly one of ensuring real participation in decisions that seem too complex and too far removed from the average citizen. Political alienation becomes a problem. Similarly, the issue of political equality of the sexes gives way to a struggle for the sexual equality of women. Oh, that's showing quite a bit of foresight there as well. In the industrial, because now we've got OnlyFans, I think we've achieved peak sexual equality, right? Mission accomplished. In the industrial society, woman, the operator of machines, ceases to be physically inferior to the male, a consideration of some importance in rural life, and begins to demand her political rights. Yes, it's totally organic. natural. It was just an evolution, not at all orchestrated and planned by people such as Sidney and Beatrice Webb. In the emerging technotronic society, automation threatens both males and females. In intellectual talent is computable. Wow. These words are ringing so true in the era of AI. The pill encourages sexual equality, and women begin to claim complete equality. I think we are in the era where women are claiming complete equality. Although in some cases they're actually going in the opposite way, right? Number 8, the newly enfranchised masses are organized in the industrial society by trade unions and political parties and unified by relatively simple and somewhat ideological programs. I'm kind of confused about what he means by ideological programs. He's sort of suggesting that ideological programs and ideologies themselves are a product of the industrial society, and they've gone away now in the Technotronic era. That's kind of the sense that I'm getting, sort of reading between the lines, right? Which is just there's no ideology in the present day. Come on, that's crazy. But anyway, moreover, political attitudes are influenced by appeals to nationalist sentiments communicated through the massive increase of newspapers, employing naturally the reader's natural language. In the Technotronic society, the trend seems to be toward aggregating the individual support of millions of unorganized citizens who are easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities. Ooh, that's interesting, isn't it? And effectively exploiting the latest communication techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. There you go. Reliance on television and hence the tendency to replace language with imagery, which is international rather than national, and to include war coverage or scenes of hunger in places as distant as, for example, India, creates a somewhat more cosmopolitan, though highly impressionistic, involvement in global affairs. Yeah, that's another key passage as well. He is telling the truth. But he's just leaving out the fact that it's all by design. But yeah, that bit about magnetic and attractive personalities just makes me think of Trump, the Donald, and then the exploitation of communication techniques to manipulate emotions. Manipulate emotions and control reason. So that's the function of the latest communication technology. And he's writing in the 70s. This was before social media, before algorithmic feeds, before infinite scroll, before all of this stuff. Amazing. Number 9. Economic power in the early phase of industrialization tends to be personalized by either great entrepreneurs like Henry Ford or bureaucratic industrial officials like Kaganovich or Mink. The tendency toward depersonalization of economic power is stimulated in the next stage by the appearance of a highly complex interdependence between governmental institutions, scientific establishments, and industrial organizations. As economic power becomes inseparably linked with political power, it becomes more invisible, and the sense of individual futility increases. Right. That bit, I zoned out a little bit. Where did he start to talk about the Technotronic era? I think the big takeaway from that one is this sense of individual futility increases. So the system is being built to the point where you feel like there's nothing you can do about it and there's no influence and you really have no power apart from being able to put an X in a box every 4 years. Yeah. And this is reinforced by this bombardment of, hey, look at this tragedy in India that you can do nothing about. Hey, look at this war in the Middle East that you can do nothing about. Hey, look at this natural disaster in Japan that you can do nothing about. Reinforcing and reminding you that as an individual, you are powerless. But as a collective, Join the Borg and you will be able to make a difference. All right, number 10. 10 and final one on the list. In an industrial society, the acquisition of goods and the accumulation of personal wealth become forms of social attainment for an unprecedentedly I've never heard unprecedented used as an adverb before. Unprecedentedly large number of people. Is it an adverb? I don't think it is. It's just an adjective still, isn't it? Unprecedentedly large number of people. In the Technotronic society, the adaptation of science to humane ends and a growing concern with the quality of life become both possible and increasingly a moral imperative for a large number of citizens, especially the young. So he's saying that the young are going to recognize this moral imperative to use science to improve the quality of life for the most number of people. And then the Club of Rome come along and they say, we're going to harness all that energy by bombarding them with tales of climate warming, global climate warming change, and tell them that this is affecting everyone and it's going to kill everyone. And if you want to do something about it, well, you need to badger your parents to buy a Tesla and maybe don't have any children. That would be good too. But yeah, just recognizing that this moral imperative for young people that manifests in Greta standing there saying, "How dare you?" The little autistic teenager who sails around the world on Rothschild boats, lecturing people about, driving their cars and going on holiday and eating steak. Eventually, these changes and many others, including some that more directly affect the personality and quality of the human being himself, will make the Technotronic society as different from the industrial as the industrial was from the agrarian. There's a footnote here which says, Bell defines the 5 dimensions of the post-industrial society as involving the following. Number 1, the creation of a service economy. And number 2, the preeminence of the professional and technical class. 3, the centrality of theoretical knowledge as the source of innovation and policy formulation in the society. That's interesting, isn't it? The centrality of theoretical knowledge as the source of political formulation. So rather than take actual knowledge of reality and use that to inform our policy, we'll just take theoretical knowledge, made up knowledge, the theory of evolution, germ theory, global climate warming change theory, and we'll build policy on theory, right? What could go wrong? Number 5, sorry, I skipped one. Number 4, the possibility of self-sustaining technological growth. That to me sounds like self-sustaining technology. That sounds like self-replicating machinery or software, right? If it's self-sustaining, what does it mean? If it's self-sustaining, that's like, humans are self-sustaining because we can make more humans and we sustain well, some of us do, not all of us in this day and age. It's bad for the planet. But yeah, self-sustaining technology, that's sounds like self-replicating robots of some kind. Number 5, the creation of a new intellectual technology with no explanation of what that might be or what it might mean. So back to the text. And just as the shift from an agrarian economy and feudal politics toward an industrial society and political systems based on the individual's emotional identification with the nation state gave rise to contemporary international politics, so the appearance of the Technotronic society reflects the onset of a new relationship between man and his expanded global reality. And I'm thinking I might leave it there. I'm going to look ahead just to see how long the next section is. It's 1, 2, 3. It's about 4 pages long. We could probably get that done. We'll do that. We'll do the next section as well, then we'll call it. So the next section is social explosion and implosion. So really, just to summarize that last bit, what he's saying there is this new global world that me and my buddies in the Bilderberg and CFR and Trilateral Commission have are building, creating for you by interlocking and by pushing nations into a system of interdependence, right? Which forces that close cooperating of the nations, which leads to a standardizing of the way things are done everywhere, and also to the requirement of an overarching system of control, i.e. the UN or the Bank for International Settlements or whatever it might be, the NATO. Because we're building a new system of one world control around you, the human being is going to have to adapt and change. That's kind of the message I'm getting. Although obviously he doesn't say it that we're doing this to you, and therefore you got to adapt and get into it, adapt or die. He's not saying that, but that's kind of me reading between the lines, right? The next section, last one for tonight, social explosion / implosion. This new relationship is a tense one. Man has still to define it conceptually and thereby render it comprehensible to himself. Our expanded global reality is simultaneously fragmenting and thrusting itself in upon us. The result of the coincident explosion and implosion is not only insecurity and tension, but also an entirely novel perception of what many still call international affairs. Life seems to lack cohesion as environment rapidly alters and human beings become increasingly manipulable and malleable. Right. So the environment rapidly alters. Again, sounds like it's just evolving and just changing, and there's impersonal forces at work. No, it's artificially being changed by architects, by builders, right? You know that group that like to build things? They go to the Bilderberg meetings, right? So the environment is rapidly being changed on purpose. And human beings become increasingly manipulable and malleable. Well, human beings have always been manipulable and malleable. We have always been under the yoke of this parasitic minority, always falling for their scams and their schemes and their plots and their deceits and their lies, always falling for the comfortable lie instead of pursuing the uncomfortable truth. I think human beings have always been this manipulable and malleable, and that's why malleable, and that's why we've the state of humanity has been slavery since what's the saying? Since dot. Everything seems more transitory and temporary. External reality more fluid than solid. The human being more synthetic than authentic. Ugh. He's talking about synthetic humans, but he has a point. Human beings are more synthetic in the sense that they are not learning who they are inside. Not doing that self-understanding exploration, that shadow work, that integration, that exploration of who I am. Who am I really? You know. Instead, what people do is they just download opinions and ideas and views from the many avenues, from the primarily from the parents, then from the friends and teachers at school. Nowadays, from media, social media influencers, algorithms, feeds. People just download little bits and bytes, as Alan would say, and then they construct their persona. Well, they don't even actively construct their persona, right? They absorb by osmosis these bits and bytes, and that is what they become. This hodgepodge, this random assortment of things they've collected along the way. Like I said, when I was younger, I used to emulate friends and copy things they did and said, and clothes they would wear. I want to wear the same sort of clothes, and all sorts of different things I can think of. I once had a friend who he was Italian, and he called his dad Pom Pom for some reason. I don't know why. And I was like, well, I'm going to start calling my dad Pom Pom. And I remember I just started calling my dad Pom Pom. I'm talking like primary school. I was very young. I started calling my dad Pom Pom, and I remember he just snapped at me. He was like, stop calling me Pom Pom. So it's just an example, right, of humans being malleable and manipulable, what we tend to do is download and observe what we observe, monkey see, monkey do, and we repeat it, right? And then we enact that, we recreate it, we embody what we see, because we think, well, if they're doing it, that's what I should do in order to fit in and survive in this community. So that's the synthetic way, right? You just download stuff and embody it and never question it. The authentic way is to really get in there and get under the fingernails of the things you think you believe, you know, your values. Where do they come from? Is it coming from you, or is it something you've downloaded or picked up along the way or been implanted in you? Or nudged, right? The behavioral nudges, the social engineering, that's it. Have you just been nudged to be a football fan or to be a heavy metal enthusiast? Have you just been nudged to be a liberal Democrat or a clownfish, rainbow unicorn? You know, so this is the hard, deep internal work of knowing thyself that a lot of people don't want to do, myself included. You know, like, it's hard work. It is hard work. But if you want to do it, I'll give you a resource. I've mentioned this resource before, but I think it's a really good one. You can't really, the book's too big. The resource is this book, Self-Therapy. It's a floppy book. Self-Therapy by J. Early, PhD. And it's really simple, easy to follow. And you don't need psychedelic drugs. You don't need to go to the Amazon to meet a shaman. You don't need to sit in a sweat lodge for 3 days or starve yourself for a week, 40 days, 40 nights in the desert. You can sit down. You can have a peaceful, quiet place. Close your eyes, and you can go internally and start to investigate the parts of you, what they look like, what they sound like, what their purpose is, what their function is. Then they have names. It sounds crazy, but I did this for a while, and I met parts of myself, and they had names, and they told me their names, and I started talking to them, and so it's, it could all just be imagination, but when you start to have profound insights into why you are the way you are now because of something that happened to you in the past, you are able to integrate that and choose whether or not to continue that behavior. It might be a bad habit you want to get rid of. It might be a habit that you want to start, but you just keep delaying and putting off and not doing it, right? So that's a methodology that will help you do that internal work. It's one of many. I'm sure there are many others. It's just one that I happen to use and know that it works. So that is how you become an authentic human and not a synthetic human. He says, even our senses perceive an entirely novel, quote, reality, one of our own making, but nevertheless the terms of our sensations quite real. Right. So here he's talking about the artificial reality that is pumped into our minds by way of screens. If you want to know more about that, you got to go to the book. 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander. Explains how that process works in no uncertain terms. When you are looking at a screen, this screen included with me doing the broadcast, you are taking in information in a way that is very subtle and hard to detect, right? And you think you know what you're looking at and you think you know what you're getting, but there's a lot more to it. And I'm not bedazzling you with any auditory music that manipulates emotion. I'm not chopping up your attention into little bits by constantly changing the angle of the view that you're looking at. I'm not bombarding you with sensory overload. Kudos to you if you can hang out on my live streams, because it's just me talking for 3 hours, right? You got attention span and it's still intact. but what the screen does is exactly what he says right here. It's this novel reality. It's an artificial reality, and quite quote unquote real, because like Morpheus says in the Matrix, your mind makes it real. Okay, so if you watch Gone in 60 Seconds, this is a Jason Christoff example. He talks about when the film Gone in 60 Seconds was released, Nicolas Cage in the film and a gang of people go around stealing cars. He said immediately in the cities where that film was released, there was a spike in car thefts because your subconscious mind is receiving the message that I'm part of a gang of car thieves, and in order to fit in with this gang of car thieves, I need to steal cars. And then a certain number of people go out and start stealing cars. And this is a known effect. This is part of what I mentioned at the very beginning of the stream. In my opinion, the science of crowd control, of population management, is well known and understood at the very highest levels, at the very, very top. Okay? And they know that if they put this thing out, a certain number of people are going to embody that in their lives. They're going to go out and do that thing. They're going to say that. They're going to do the action. They're going to buy the product, because we all know product placement, why corporations pay top dollar to get their products in on the screen, because there'll be an uptick in sales after they make that investment. But it's the same with language used by the characters, written into the scripts, and the behaviors and the actions seen and witnessed on those screens. Which is why nowadays I really, really try to avoid violent. I try to avoid TV for the most part, full stop. But I look away at horrible violent scenes. You know, I don't want to see anything that is like just people being shit to each other. I'll give you an example. There's a series called Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and I had some buddies who were into it. I watched a few episodes, and I had to stop watching it. And the reason was, there's like 4 main characters, I think, 5 maybe, and they're just constantly ripping each other off, screwing each other over, being crap to each other, being rude, being selfish, and that's supposed to be the joke of the series. It's like, oh, there's these 5 narcissistic, selfish people, and I'm like, why do I want to watch this? Like, I don't relate to any of these characters. I don't find it entertaining. It's a bunch of people being shit to each other, you know how, and I just couldn't stick with it at all. So it's just an example, right? Yeah, Mindhack says Clockwork Orange, the film was banned. The movie was banned for that reason. Yeah, because it showed rape and assault. Yeah, very controversial at the time. Nowadays, you can watch, Squid Game, which just shows executions back to back pretty much for the entire episodes. But you got to be very careful of what you put into your mind by way of screens. That's the bottom line. Took me a long time to get there, but we arrived eventually. Now, let's get this section finished. More important, there is already widespread concern about the possibility of biological and chemical tampering with what has until now been considered the immutable essence of man. Oh my goodness. We're never going to get to the end of this section, are we? Amazing that he said this. Biological and chemical tampering with what has been considered until now the immutable essence of man. Human conduct. I just see we got $1 million in the chat. Good to have you here, $1 million. I feel richer just for being in your presence. Human conduct, some argue, can be predetermined and subjected to deliberate control. Man is increasingly acquiring the capacity. Hang on. Subject to deliberate control. Okay. Can be. Yeah, it can be. Sometimes. Maybe. In some places. Could. Possibly. We've just figured that out. I mean, deliberate control over human conduct is the story of everything, of history in a, deliberate control of human conduct. Oh, me and my friend came up with a good phrase the other day as well. The other way, deliberate control of human conduct, that's history in 4 words. And if you want to put a slightly fancier spin on it and sound all intelligent and hoity-toity, you can use the Latin version, which is divide et impera ad nauseam, which just means divide and rule, or divide and conquer until it makes you feel sick, ad nauseam, right? Divide et impera ad nauseam. We came up with that the other day. I thought it works pretty well. Yeah, deliberate control. Some can argue that humans are subject to deliberate control. That is a obfuscation of the truth, if ever I saw it. Man is increasingly acquiring the capacity to determine the sex of his children, to affect through drugs the extent of their intelligence, and to modify and control their personalities. What? Well, quiet part out loud. Speaking of a future at most only decades away, an experimenter in intelligence control asserted, quote, I foresee the time when we shall have the means and therefore, inevitably, the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all the people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. That's a footnote that I have to go and look up. Right, what is it? 3, chapter 1. Okay, let's check. 3, chapter 1. That is testimony by Dr. D. Kreck, Government Research Subcommittee of the Senate Government Operations Committee, as reported by the New York Times, April the 3rd, 1968, page 32. See also Gordon R. Taylor, The Biological Time Bomb, New York, 1967. So there's a couple of references you might want to grab. Thus, it is an open question whether technology and science will in fact increase the options open to the individual. Yeah. Under the headline, Study Terms Technology a Boon to Individualism, the New York Times reported the preliminary conclusions of a Harvard project on the social significance of science. Its participants were quoted as concluding that, quote, most Americans have a greater range of personal choice, wider experience, and a more highly developed sense of self-worth than ever before. This may be so, but a judgment of this sort rests essentially on an intuitive and comparative insight into the present and past states of mind of Americans. I got to pause there, not pause, but I got to add something to the conversation. So on this topic of like individuals having more options open to them, back to the 4 Arguments book by Jerry Mander, essential reading, grab it. I really think everyone should grab it. There's a section called the colonization of experience, the standard gauge railway, centralization of control. It's an early section. I'm trying to find it. I think it might be the standard gauge railway. I think it might be that. Let me just double check this bit again. So there's the unification of experience, mediated environment center. So it's either the unification of experience is one bit. I think that's it, actually. That's what I'm thinking of in the introduction. So the unification of experience is the exact opposite of what Brzezinski was just talking about there, is that think about the act of watching television. This is what technology does, right? Before television, before you had a television, people are doing what? Fill in the blank. You could spend all night filling in that blank with all the variety of activities that people were doing, right? Introduce a TV, put one in the living room of every house in the country, and in the bedroom now, and the pocket now. What are people doing? They're sitting on their ass staring at a glowing rectangle. That is the unification of experience. That is the standardization of behavior, right? That is not opening up more options. That is narrowing the activities that people do. That is narrowing individuals down to couch potatoes. Before the option was there to sit and watch the glowing rectangle, people would have been, you couldn't even finish the list of the things that people would have been doing. And now they're just standardized. The behavior is all that individuality has been ironed out, squeezed out. So yeah, so I think the New York Times is talking a lot of bullshit in that particular article, but I haven't read it, so I don't know for sure. Anyway. Greater range of personal choice. So we're looking at the past and present states of mind of Americans. In this connection, a word of warning from an acute observer is highly relevant. Quote, it behooves us to examine carefully the degree of validity as measured by actual behavior of the statement that a benefit of technology will be to increase the number of options and alternatives the individual can choose from. In principle, it could. In fact, the individual may use any number of psychological devices to avoid the discomfort of information overload and thereby keep the range of alternatives to which he responds much narrower than that which technology in principle makes available to him. In other words, the real questions are how the individual will exploit the options, to what extent he will be intellectually and psychologically prepared to exploit them, and in what way society as a whole will create a favorable setting for taking advantage of these options. Their availability is not of itself proof of a greater sense of freedom or self-worth. Instead of accepting himself as a spontaneous given, man in the most advanced societies may become more concerned with conscious self-analysis according to external, explicit criteria. Yeah, so the question being, who provides the external? Where does the external, explicit criteria come from? Well, just look at your schools and you'll find out, won't you? What is my IQ? What are my aptitudes, personality traits, capabilities, attractions, and negative features? The internal man, spontaneously accepting his own spontaneity, will more and more be challenged by the external man, consciously seeking his self-conscious image, and the transition from one to the other may not be easy. It will also give rise to difficult problems in determining the legitimate scope of social control. The possibility of extensive chemical mind control, the danger of loss of individuality inherent in extensive transplantation, the feasibility of manipulating the genetic structure will call for the social definition of common criteria of use and restraint. As the previously cited writer put it, while the chemical affects the individual, the person is significant to himself and to society in his social context, at work, at home, at play. The consequences are social consequences. In deciding how to deal with such alterers of the ego and of experience, and consequently alterers of the personality after the experience, and in deciding how to deal with the changed human beings, we will have to face new questions such as who am I? When am I who? That's a question I've never asked myself. When am I who? When am I who? Who are they in relation to me? Moreover, man will increasingly be living in man-made and rapidly man-altered environments. Will they now? Yes, they will, because they've pushed into cities, into high-rise apartment blocks, into smart 15-minute controlled geo-fenced areas and communities and neighborhoods. Yeah. By the end of this century, approximately 2/3 of the people in the advanced countries will live in cities. Oh, will they? There's a footnote there explaining it. And look, he's quoting good old... I'm going to have to read this. So, he says 2/3 people in the advanced countries will live in cities. In 1900, there were 10 cities with populations of 1 million or more. In 1955, the number had grown to 61. In 1965, there were over 100 cities with populations of 1 million or more. Today, in Australia and Oceania, 3/4 of the people live in cities. It's interesting that he uses Oceania, isn't it? From 1984, I think, is the other place where I've seen that used. In America and Europe, 1/2. In Africa and Asia, 1/5 live in cities. Okay, it's this footnote. That's a separate one. I thought they were all the same. Urban growth has so far been primarily the byproduct of accidental economic convenience, of the magnetic attraction of population centers, and of the flight of many from rural poverty and exploitation. It has not been deliberately designed to improve the quality of life. Hang on. Okay. Urban growth has not been deliberately designed to improve the quality of life. There you have it. The impact of accidental cities is already contributing to the depersonalization of individual life as the kinship structure contracts and the enduring relations of friendship become more difficult to maintain. Julian Huxley was perhaps guilty of only slight exaggeration when he warned that overcrowding in animals leads to distorted, neurotic, and downright pathological behavior, we can be sure that the same is true in principle of people. Julian Huxley, first director of UNESCO. And actually, after we read this book and the next one, we're going to read a book by Julian Huxley called New Bottles for New Wine. So very fitting that he's mentioned here. We can be sure that the same is true in principle of people. City life today is definitely leading to mass mental disease, to growing vandalism, and possible eruptions of mass violence. I'm just going to see the Julian Huxley reference. It is footnote 7. The Crisis in Man's Destiny. And that was an article that he wrote in Playboy magazine. I'll see if I can dig up a copy. Yeah, I'm dedicated to gathering these documents and preserving them. I'll see if I can dig up a copy of Playboy, January 1967. For the good, for the benefit of the mission, the Hayes Review's mission. I feel obligated to track down a copy of that publication. There's another little footnote here at the bottom of the page. G.N. Carstairs in Why Is Man Aggressive? And that is from Impact of Science on Society, April to June edition, 1968, page 90. Argues that population growth, crowding, and social oppression all contribute to irrational and intensified aggression. Experiments on rats bear this out. Observation of human behavior in large cities seems to warrant a similar conclusion. For a cri du coeur against this congested condition from a French sociologist, see Jacques Ellul, the Technological Society. Well, Brzezinski is definitely referencing and talking about all the heavy hitters. Now, I thought this Impact of Science on Society was going to be a Bertrand Russell reference, but it's not. It seems like that is some sort of magazine, publication, journal. I'm not sure. Okay, we got one page to go and then we're done. The problem of identity is likely to be complicated by a generation gap, intensified by the dissolution of traditional ties and values derived from extended family and enduring community relationships. Yeah, so extended family and community is gone. The dialogue between the generations, I'm just going to dissolution as well of traditional ties and values. The dialogue between the generations is becoming a dialogue of the deaf. Yeah, also true. It no longer operates within the conservative, liberal, or nationalist, internationalist framework. The breakdown in communication between the generations, so vividly evident during the student revolts of 1968, was rooted in the irrelevance of the old symbols to many younger people. Yeah, nothing at all contrived or done deliberately to all that at all, right? It was just, symbols, not relevant to young people. That's what it was. Debate implies the acceptance of a common frame of reference and language. Since these were lacking, debate became increasingly impossible. Though currently the clash is over values, with many of the young rejecting those of their elders, who in turn contend that the young have evaded the responsibility of articulating theirs. In the future, the clash between generations will be also over expertise. Within a few years, the rebels in the more advanced countries who today have the most visibility will be joined by a new generation making its claim to power in government and business. A generation trained to reason logically. Yeah. As accustomed to exploiting electronic aids to human reasoning as we have been to using machines to increase our own mobility. So that bit there, okay, so as accustomed to exploiting electronic aids to human reasoning. That's ChatGPT. That's AI. That's Grok. It's just a tool. There's no harm in using it. It's just a tool. Expressing itself in a language that functionally relates to these aids. And I'll give you an example. Someone I was talking to said, I said something like, oh, that's a great image you made, thumbnail for a video. And this person said, yeah, it took me ages to gen. It took me ages to gen. T-O space G-E-N. And I was like, to gen? And I realized that this person meant to generate, meaning to generate using an AI tool, right? You type it in, tell it to do it, and then it generates. And I just never heard the verb to gen written in this way before. It's the first time I heard it. I remember it. So that's an example of how language will further entrench that conversation of the deaf. What did he call it? Dialogue of the deaf. That it will further entrench that dialogue of the deaf between the younger and the old, using as language changes to describe things that the old people don't use and don't do. Accepting as routine managerial processes current innovations such as planning, programming, budgeting systems, and the appearance in high business echelons of top computer executives, as the older elite defends what it considers not only its own vested interests, but more basically its own way of life. The resulting clash could generate even more intense conceptual issues. And we're going to leave it there. When I said we'd finish off that last section was literally 4 pages long. It took us quite a while to get through it. I wasn't expecting it to be that juicy, I'll be honest. I need to put a little... There we go. So that concludes part 1 of our Between Two Ages reading. I think you'll admit this is proving to be a very juicy one indeed. Indeed. There's been loads going on in the chat over there, and I apologize that I haven't been able to keep track of it and respond. But you know how it is. Multitasking is fake news. But it's great. I'm really happy that you're all getting on with each other and making friends and having a little bit of banter and a back and forth. That is what it's all about, building some community, finding the like-minded people who are interested in the same sort of stuff as we are. So, yes, Frank, this book is no disappointment at all. It is, I'm astonished really at how many juicy nuggets we got in the first 18 pages, right? We're only 18 pages into it. And there are 334 pages in total. So for a little book, it packs a wallop. And I'm starting to realize now just why it is Jay Dyer, Alan Watt, and the others refer to it so often. It is quite revealing. And I think we are in good company reading it. He's referencing some of the other heavy hitters. I think he's, he's letting a lot of cats out of a lot of bags. He's clearly a cat lover. He doesn't like the cats to be in the bags. So I have a feeling this is going to be a good series and we're going to enjoy getting through this book together. So thank you all for being here. I'm not going to go through and read everybody's names out again. I haven't spotted anyone new into the chat. I try and catch people who roll in and give everyone a mention at least once, but you know who you are. You're awesome. I love you all. It's great having you here. So, as always, pinned comment at the top, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to find ways to get in touch, share, comment, like, subscribe, donate, support, all that good stuff, it's all right there. It's easy peasy. And it's all in one place. And you can download the guitar music bundle. That's always good. Wrong camera. Okay, that's it for me. I'm going to go and hang out with my son. Hopefully he's not asleep. And we'll see what he's got to say. Gurgles, squeaks, and burps most of the time. And farts. He's really good at farting. So great to have you all here. And we'll be continuing next week, next Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a fantastic week. I saw, I think it was Asmelia saying, do what you love and love what you do. Yeah, and whatever you do, do it with love. I would add that as well. Sometimes we gotta focus on reality. If you're washing up, focus on washing up. The sensations, the doing it really well. Doing things really well, no matter how seemingly small and insignificant. That's a good way to approach life. Taking pride and care in what you do and how you do it, no matter how rudimentary or boring or basic that the task at hand might seem. It can be a very good practice to be consciously aware and present in the moment, even when we're doing these mundane things. Just to remember that we are living human beings, and we're having this experience, and it is temporary. It's not going to last forever. And we can take a lot of pleasure and joy in the simple things. And there's a lot of that out there if we know how to tune into it and appreciate it. So that's my final message for today. Take it easy, everybody. Hope to see you next Friday. Please share the video around if you know anybody who you think might be interested in these pretty amazing revelations from Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the most influential statesmen the United States has ever seen. Creator of the Trilateral Commission, which Keir Starmer is a member of. That is the link. That is the way that you get people to be interested in it. You say, oh, you know, Keir Starmer is a member of the Trilateral Commission. And they go, no, what's that? You say, well, it's this group of internationalists and they're very interested in blah, blah, blah. And it was created by this guy, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Do you know him? No, that's a crazy name. Who's that guy? Oh, well, you know, he was a Polish diplomat and statesman. And he wrote a book. And it's crazy, the things he wrote down in this book. Oh, yeah, really? What did he say? Well, and then you can tell him about the quotes, crazy quotes we just read tonight, or you can send them to my channel and tell them to give their attention span a workout, a much needed workout, I might add. But right, I'm going to call it there. I'm getting tired. Take it easy, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you on the next one. God bless.
Thank you.